Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just coming up to 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 29th of February.
Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer. That's the verdict of a Home Office-commissioned inquiry into the murder of Sarah Everard. Without a significant overhaul of police vetting, there is nothing to stop another Couzens operating in plain sight, warns the report's author.
A new record. Over 62,000 people were granted asylum in the UK last year, the highest number since records began. The backlog may be down, but could quick decision-making on asylum applications now come back to haunt the Home Office?
And Rishi Sunak has warned that mob rule is replacing democratic rule as he pushes the police to do more to protect MPs. But the comments have sparked some outrage with human rights campaigners saying he is wildly exaggerating the issue. Who's right? Yes, so Rishi Sunak has said this, that mob rule, there's a growing consensus that mob rule is replacing democratic rule. And a chap from Amnesty International says he's wildly exaggerating the issue and risks delegitimising the right of peaceful protest.
Is that his official job title? Chap at Amnesty International.
Well, I can name him, Tom Sutherden. Amnesty International UK's Law and Human Rights Director
I prefer chap.
Says the Prime Minister is wildly exaggerating the issue of this mob rule. Do you think he is?
I think that's over-interpreting what the Prime Minister said. According to all these reports, the Prime Minister was saying some people are interpreting this as mob. He's not literally saying that mobs are ruling the country. It'd be concerning if the Prime Minister was saying that, because nominally the Prime Minister is ruling the country. But I think people are just taking these words. Whenever anyone says anything on either side of this debate, it's over-interpreted. And if these things were listened to in context, if people had open and civil conversations with one another, we'd probably stop talking past one another, as it looks like Amnesty International and the Prime Minister are doing on this issue.
I mean, he's talking about the experiences of his own MPs, isn't he? And those in the House of Commons who have stood up in the House of Commons and said that they received threats. And there's lots of concerns about mob rule, not least Tobias Ellwood, who was targeted outside his home. You've also got, of course, Mike Freer standing down because of threats.
It comes down to definitional arguments, right? To some people, I don't think anyone in this country could deny that MPs feel under threat. I mean, we had Keir Starmer's home visited by activists just yesterday.
Just Stop Oil in that case.
Yeah, but whether you describe that as mob rule or not is the argument, not that this stuff isn't happening.
And anyway, he said this in order to push the police to do more. Let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.com. Do you think we risk mob rule in this country? But let's get your headlines.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your top story. Sarah Everard's killer Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer, according to an inquiry, and chances to stop the sexual predator were repeatedly ignored and missed. The 33-year-old was murdered on her way home in Clapham, South London, by the serving police officer in March 2021. Inquiry chairwoman Dame Aglioli has warned without a radical overhaul of policing practices and culture, there is nothing to stop another Couzens operating in plain sight. Miss Everard's family welcomed the findings, saying she died because he was a police officer and she would never have got into a stranger's car.
Even after Cousin's arrest and a review of his vetting clearance, the Metropolitan Police Service told the inquiry in 2022 that they would still have recruited him if provided with the same information. I found this astonishing. I make a number of recommendations to improve recruitment and vetting, covering everything from in-person interviews and home visits for new recruits to improvements for information sharing around transfers. In addition to the shortcomings in vetting and recruitment, the report shows very clearly how police investigations of indecent exposure were poor.
The Prime Minister has told police to use their powers to protect MPs after warning the UK is descending into mob rule. The government has already announced a £31 million security package to boost security following safety fears. Concerns have been growing over MPs being targeted by protesters since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. Schools Minister Damien Hinds says the additional support is needed.
It's really important to protect our democracy. That's not just members of parliament, of course, but it includes members of parliament. We have a representative democracy, and it's really important that that can go about its business, that individuals can go about their business, and by the way, their staff members and families without fear. So I do think it's right that there is this focus. The police obviously do fantastic work, and we're all very grateful to them. And yes, I do welcome that focus that the Prime Minister has brought to protecting our democracy, our democratic process and democratic participation.
Now, the latest migrant statistics show illegal migration has fallen, but legal migration is up. Government figures show small boat arrivals in 2023 have been down 36% since the year before, and there were 5 times higher boat returns. Illegal migration in 2023 was 1/3 fewer than in 2022. However, there were 3.4 million entry clearance visas granted in 2023. That's 20% higher than the year before. Dame Esther Rantzen is campaigning for a fresh debate on a vote for legalising assisted dying in the UK, saying the current law is a mess. She recently revealed she had joined the Dignitas Assisted Dying Clinic in Switzerland after she was diagnosed with lung cancer. It follows a report which warned that the government must consider what to do if the law is changed in other parts of the UK. The issue is currently being considered in Jersey and the Isle of Man, both of which are British Crown dependencies. Some members of the public expressed their opinion on the issue.
I think there are going to be a lot of ramifications from this. I mean, they have it legalised in Switzerland, don't they? But it's really going to be something that for a long time the ruling class will have access to, because how expensive it will be, how feasible will it be for the NHS to be able to support it?
Well, in theory, I don't see why it shouldn't be legalised, because everyone has a right to die in the way they want to.
Why should they suffer when they're in agony? And this agony could go on for years. And is it fair to make people suffer?
And Harry biker star Dave Myers has died aged 66, less than 2 years after revealing his cancer diagnosis. Cy King, his motorcycling cooking duo partner, revealed the news on social media, saying he passed away peacefully at his home with his family. He said he can't put into words how he's feeling at the moment, but everyone who loved Dave is devastated. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
A report into the rape and murder of Sarah Everard has found that her killer, Wayne Couzens, should never have been given a job as a police officer.
It also found various chances to stop the sexual predator were repeatedly ignored and missed. The report also calls for a complete overhaul of police vetting.
Well, let's speak to our Home and Security editor for more on this. Mark White joins us now. And Mark, this is an excoriating report.
Yeah, I mean, where to begin on this? There are a catalogue of incidents in Wayne Couzens' past which should really have been flagged up, acted on and recognised in those vetting procedures. He first, according to Dame Angelini, who compiled this report, he first started offending back in 1995 with a serious alleged sexual assault on a child barely in her teens. There were also other victims, at least 4 other victims that have subsequently been spoken to that never came forward at the time. And Dame Angelini believes there may be more victims still out there. Now, that pattern of offending continued while in 2015 he was in a car in Dover. He allegedly exposed himself. A couple reported that to the police. They gave the police in Kent the vehicle registration number, a description of cousins, and an investigation was carried out. But it was, according to Dame Angelini, a half-hearted investigation that was doomed to failure from the start. And although they'd identified Wayne Couzens, they appear to have done little else. And then the couple that made the original complaint eventually withdrew that complaint. There were other allegations, of course, against Wayne Couzens in the months and weeks before Sarah Everard's murder. Allegations of indecent exposure in a rural location in Kent and at a McDonald's in Swanley in Kent on 2 occasions. Now, that last set of incidents at the McDonald's was being investigated by the Metropolitan Police before Sarah Everard's murder, but it wasn't prioritised. So that investigation had not really been acted on when he went out and murdered Sarah Everard in March of 2021. So an absolute catalogue of failures here that have been highlighted here. Deeply embarrassing for the Metropolitan Police, Kent Police, the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, where he also worked for. The police service as a whole has promised to tighten up its vetting procedures.
And that's the shocking point as well, isn't it? That this is 3 police forces that could and should have stopped this man from ever being a police officer.
No, you're absolutely right there, Emily. If we start with Kent Police to begin with, he joined Kent Police as a volunteer or a special constable in 2002. Then he subsequently tried to join Kent Police as a full-time officer, but the vetting procedures then turned him down for that post. However, when the Civil Nuclear Constabulary then later employed him, an outside force, Thames Valley Police, carried out the vetting procedures for the Civil Nuclear Constabulary. They found that he had serious debt management problems, a big debt that was poorly managed. And of course, this is a big red flag for any police force in recruiting people. They don't recruit people with serious debt issues because that lays them open to corruption, of course. There were also allegations that, he'd overstated his involvement with the Territorial Army for a time as a volunteer with them. But the Civil Nuclear Constabulary ignored that recommendation from Thames Valley Police and employed him nonetheless. And then we go into the Metropolitan Police when he eventually joined the Met in 2018. Again, there were vetting procedures that should have really been more robust. He was checked on the police national computer with regard to whether there were any incidents of note. Well, there were in the police national computer database references to an allegation of indecent exposure in Kent in 2015, this incident in Dover. And there was also a report in 2013 of him having gone missing and being reported missing at that time. But it seems when the Met Police checked out the police national computer, they recorded that they'd found nothing in relation to Wayne Couzens. So the vetting, yes, very significantly needs to be addressed. And according to the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, and various police forces, they are now involved in trying to have a more robust vetting system.
It is just astonishing that this information was there on those computers and was somehow overlooked, whether accidentally or by other means. But Mark White, thank you so much for bringing us the detail of this damning report.
I mean, how many red flags do you need before you decide that someone isn't suitable to be a police officer? Anyway, joining us now to discuss this further is retired Scotland Yard Detective Inspector Hamish Brown. There's Mark White, but Hamish Brown will be joining us very shortly. Hamish, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You just heard Mark White setting the scene, discussing what this report has said. The number of red flags, the number of missed opportunities.
Yes, good afternoon, Tim and Emily. Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is unpleasant reading. It's terribly uncomfortable, and there's been one mistake after another. I want to mention the vetting. Now, in my very varied retirement, apart from talking on TV and things like that, I also do a fair amount of agency work in the criminal justice system, reasonably short term. And part of that's been working with the National Probation Service. And what I did was I did home visits looking at properties. Prisoners, some high risk of harm, were going to be released to. Of course, they were under the supervision of the National Probation Service. And I knew what to look for. I'm not going to give away the tricks of the trade, what I look for. But when I found things, I reported it, and at least it gave the offender manager something to work on. And very often those properties weren't seen as being, or just weren't seen as being suitable. So in those circumstances, someone going to the house, physically speaking to people, looking around, you know what to look for. You know where the danger signs are. And goodness me, in this electronic age, with the police national computer, with the right consents to go into someone's bank account, you can't just do it offhand. You've got to get their authority, of course. Those red flags will come to light. There are local intelligence records. There is a plethora of information out there, and it beggars belief how all this was missed.
Is it just because police services are too stretched, having to vet with very thin resources, that sort of they're clicking through file after file after file and occasionally they'll miss something? Or how could these things possibly have been missed?
Well, I just wonder where the police see their priorities, and of course they've got to go out and investigate crime, and that's got to be top of the list. But they do have a big recruiting department, and with that they've got to look at what they're going to do when the applications come through. It's just not a ticky box situation. It is much more than that. It's got to be a dedicated resource, and in fact you do this with financial investigations. There's a separate team. They know what to look for. They know the accounts to go for. They can find out all sorts of people's backgrounds, and this is absolutely crucial. The police take this on. They're totally at fault here. It's a real big shame for the 160,000 police officers up and down the country who aren't rapists and murderers, and they will be disgusted as I am. So it is most important. It's the first stepping stone to someone joining the police, recruiting and vetting. You've got to get it right.
I mean, that's a very good point. The other police officers will be equally horrified, I'm sure. But how does a man reported to the police 8 times prior to this rape and murder of Sarah Everard, 8 times for offences including kidnap at knife point and child sexual assault? I just don't understand, regardless of resources, how that can go, unflagged.
Well, I'm sure it was somewhere, but there wasn't the dedication, there wasn't the perseverance to look at someone's background, and that is utterly appalling. So, as I say, they've got to get it right and go back to square one and sort themselves out with the recruiting and vetting.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Hamish Brown, great to speak to you, MBE, Scotland Yard, retired Scotland Yard Detective Inspector. Great to talk to you.
Now, mob rule is replacing democratic rule. That was the warning of the Prime Minister as he calls for a more robust police response to intimidation, disruption and subversion.
Yes, this comes as the Home Office announces yesterday £31 million aimed at protecting MPs in response to the domestic impact of the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict in particular.
But this has become an enormous row today, mainly because of these words, mob rule. And there have been a number of organisations, Amnesty International is one of them, that have been critical of the Prime Minister for his comments. And to me, I think that this is these organisations and individuals talking past one another, not necessarily acting in good faith, not asking the questions, why was the Prime Minister saying this? Because it's worth reading out the full quote. There is a growing consensus that mob rule is replacing democratic rule. Not just mob rule is replacing democratic rule, but calling out what other people have been saying.
And I wonder if he's talking about this kind of scenario. I don't know if we can show here a clip from an English local council in Chorley. Let's have a little look at this.
I'm not in a bloody Gaza! Dudes! Go on!
So this council was having a local budget debate. And as you can see there, protesters, pro-Palestine protesters, disrupted it. It all seemed to kick off a little bit. One Tory councillor shouted something saying, "This is Chorley, not beep Gaza." And this is how this conflict is taking on such a role just in local politics now, turning events over.
You would think that it was 1920. You'd think that the British mandate still existed in Palestine or Israel. Well, since 1948, we haven't controlled that area. I don't understand why, of all places, a local council in Chorley is going to be the be-all and end-all in deciding what's going on in this conflict. What on earth are these people thinking that they're going to achieve, other than just disrupting the lives of everyone in a country that, let me remind you, is not a participant in this war?
The problem is, I'm not suggesting that there's any criminality here, but more generally in this conversation, the Prime Minister was clearly trying to say to the police that they need to step up in terms of how they deal with protests, in terms of how they deal with what he's been calling mob rule on our streets. And, I mean, it doesn't take much of a search to look at how MPs have been talking about their security recently. You've got two Jewish MPs, two Jewish Labour MPs, talking about how they've had to change their security arrangements substantially. They need increased number of plainclothes police officers just at their constituency meetings. And Charlotte Nichols MP, she said she basically can't go anywhere alone now because of that fear. Anyone just can come up to you, shout obscenities, call you a murderer, and go on their way. And
I know that we've discussed this as well. It's not just about MPs.
No, of course not.
Anyone who is visibly Jewish in our major cities across the United Kingdom now is fearful of expressing those symbols of their faith, of their ethnicity.
But, I mean, it is crazy. You're having a local budget debate at the local council in Chorley, and it gets disrupted like that. And we've seen the same. We saw Angela Rayner. She was at some kind of local event. In storms the protesters, and it gets disrupted. Very aggressive shouting at her.
I'm not here to denigrate the vital, important work that Chorley Council does. It's just I don't think that they've got a foreign policy. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I suppose not. But now everyone has to have a foreign policy. This is demanded of everyone.
It's not just every democratic body, but every business has to have a foreign policy.
Every business has to have a foreign policy, otherwise you'll be boycotted.
Every celebrity has to have a foreign policy.
Yeah.
The celebrities that don't put up a note on their Instagram accounts will be hounded in the comments, "Free Palestine, free Palestine."
It's
as
true.
if it's Lady Gaga who's firing missiles at areas in the Gaza Strip. I don't know. I mean, this is ridiculous.
It is true. Everyone has to have a position. And most people either don't know enough or they may not have a strong opinion. And that's OK. Anyway, coming up...
You get the worst cocktail of it all, which is people that definitely do not know enough but have a very strong opinion nevertheless.
Oh, there's lots of those too. Coming up, new figures show the UK granted asylum to a record number of people last year. We'll be breaking down the numbers after this very short break.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World.
Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yeah.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. Britain, 25 minutes past 12, and the UK granted asylum to a record number of people last year, with Home Office data released this morning showing that more than 62,000 people were granted refugee status or other protection following an application last year.
Yes, it comes as it's also revealed the government is forking out a whopping £15 million a day on putting up asylum seekers in hotels. Wasn't too long ago we were told it was £7 million.
Yes.
Before that, £4 million. Anyway, spending £4.3 billion more of taxpayer money than budgeted on asylum support in the last year. Now, that's according to research from the Labour Party.
Well, the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said that these shocking figures demonstrated the complete chaos in the system left by the Conservatives, her words. It comes as figures show that the UK granted asylum to 62,336 people last year, the highest ever recorded.
Well, let's speak to Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control, Robert Bates, who presumably is all over these figures for us. Robert, 62,336 granted asylum last year alone. Your reaction?
Afternoon, guys. Yes, I'm quite flabbergasted, to be perfectly honest with you, to see these numbers. Obviously, we knew that the Conservative Party hadn't gripped this issue with anywhere near the level of strength that they needed to. But to see that their approach to clearing a backlog, which is already grown beyond all belief, is to essentially just wave through everyone that's already in the system, just shows that the Conservative Party really are not taking this issue seriously. And
Robert, is that what's going on then, in your view, that the Home Office, in a bid to reduce that backlog, to cut down on that backlog and get rid of it entirely, is just waving through applications with very quick decision-making?
Oh, of course it is. It absolutely is. I mean, I think it's quite a clear comms strategy that the government are approaching this issue with. They're simply looking to grab the headline of backlog cleared and hope that that will suffice, and people will think, OK, this is a competent government that recognises the seriousness with which we treat this issue and are prepared to, really put some muscle behind it. But quite frankly, I mean, the other figures, I think, 5.4 billion a year now being spent on hotels and associated services. It just shows that, the Rwanda scheme from the get-go is doomed to fail, and the fact that we've now wasted coming up to 3 years behind this process is wasted time and now huge wasted costs.
And yet, we still have a backlog that is enormous, over 100,000 cases. This is down 20%. Surely it's not every instance where people are being waved through. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a backlog at all. Surely there is some sort of sense that there is some process here.
Well, so the 130,000 that are in the current backlog are what are referred to as non-legacy cases. So they're essentially cases that have resumed since Rishi Sunak took over the helm. So, they are basically trying to mop up previous errors before they can even get over to the errors that they are currently presiding over. I would like to point out that I do think it's pretty rich for the Labour Party to be casting aspersions that the Conservative Party are a failure and completely flapping on this issue, given that I don't think I've heard a single credible suggestion put forward by them through the entirety of this debate. I think the only proposal that they've actually put forward that seems concrete is greater cooperation with the EU, which essentially means that we end up with a greater number of asylum seekers that we're having to process.
Isn't that one of the big points here, that there is a greater movement of people around the world? We're seeing it on the southern border of the United States, we're seeing it in the English Channel, we're seeing it through the Mediterranean, we're seeing it in Greece, in Italy. The number of people being accepted for asylum in France and Germany is higher than that in the UK. Is there anything any government can do in the wave of what is a global movement affecting every country?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's been some quite large-scale multilateral agreements over the last 5-10 years trying to effectively, I'd argue, liberalise the borders even greater. Things like the Global Compact for Migration in 2018, greater jurisprudence and focus from lawyers on things like the Refugee Convention. Are all set up essentially to further liberalise the border process. I don't think there's been any concerted effort to reassert the importance of national sovereignty when it comes to issues of the border.
Thank you very much indeed for your time. Robert Bates, Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control. I mean, you can't just say, oh, well, there's lots of movement of people around the world, so therefore it's not the government's fault that they haven't done a great job with controlling borders. I mean, there were political decisions made in the United States that encouraged more people to make that route from across the southern border.
That's true, but there's also was an upward trend anyway post-pandemic. And I think it would be wrong to look at all of these different cases in different countries in isolation, because we have seen hundreds of thousands of people getting boats across to Lampedusa. We had reports on that. Mark White himself went to Lampedusa and saw the number of people crossing from Africa into that Italian island. But we've also seen it happening in Greece. The EU has been fumbling around with this issue, just as the UK has been.
Absolutely, you're right. I'm just worried that if the Home Office are just waving through applications, and a lot of people are saying that they are, if they're just waving through applications, then could that be a massive security risk? Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, we have seen asylum seekers go on to perpetrate crimes. Well, we saw... And we need to have a proper vetting process. We need to know who these people are.
We saw that famous case of the alkaline attack in Clapham, where this individual had been on the sex offenders register and got refugee status anyway, third attempt. I wonder how many more. And of course, the ones the government have rejected, the Home Office will also have to then deal with all the appeals that come after that. So there you go. Very long process. But anyway, coming up, as Dame Esther Ransom makes fresh calls for a vote on legalising assisted dying in the UK, we've been on the streets asking you what you think. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
It's 12:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. The Home Secretary has told MPs police officers will be automatically suspended if charged with certain criminal offences. The comments come after the Sarah Everard inquiry found Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer. The 33-year-old was killed in South London in March 2021 Her family says she died because he was a police officer and she would never have got into a stranger's car. Inquiry Chairwoman Dame Aglioli has warned without a radical overhaul of policing practices and culture, there's nothing to stop another Cousins operating in plain sight.
Even after Cousins' arrest and a review of his vetting clearance, the Metropolitan Police Service told the inquiry in 2022 that they would still have recruited him if provided with the same information. I found this astonishing. I make a number of recommendations to improve recruitment and vetting, covering everything from in-person interviews and home visits for new recruits to improvements for information sharing around transfers. In addition to the shortcomings in vetting and recruitment, the report shows very clearly how police investigations of indecent exposure were poor.
Latest figures show illegal migration has fallen, but legal migration is up. The government data also reveals small boat arrivals in 2023 were down 36% on the previous year. However, the UK granted asylum to over 62,000 people in 2023, the highest level ever recorded. Harry biker star Dave Myers has died aged 66, less than 2 years after revealing his cancer diagnosis. Cy King, his motorcycling cooking duo partner, revealed the news on social media, saying he passed away peacefully at his home with his family, including himself. He said he can't put into words how he's feeling at the moment, but everyone who loved Dave is devastated. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2644 and €1.1678. The price of gold is £1,604.50 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,649 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
When you listen to Nigel Farage's assessment there, do you feel that maybe this is as good as it was going to get, given that we had the pandemic and it was inevitably always going to be a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, I think it's a bit of a poor excuse from Nigel there that they haven't done it properly. The facts are, Nigel, that it's not worked. It's not going to work. Yes, we will rejoin. I mean, are we better off for it? Are they...
Can I jump in there, Charlie? We're going to rejoin under which government? Because Labour aren't going to do that, unless you don't think...
But I mean, it's going to be unavoidable not to join, because I think it's getting worse and worse for us. I mean, let me just say this. Are the NHS better because we're out of Europe? No, they're not, because they're not employing more staff. Is the building trade better off? No. Is travelling abroad or to the EU or staying in the EU, are we better off? No. Are we better off because foods rise because of the EU? No. Are we better off with imports and export? No, because they're taking longer. The overall result is that we're not better off. The killer point here is 57% of the public will now vote to remain. 33% would leave. Surely that's the telling point.
It depends on the pollster, Charlie, because we were talking to a very good pollster earlier who said there's no enthusiasm for any change in a year. Maybe 10 years, they might be thinking about it.
Belinda de Lucia, let's bring you in. I'm sure you want to react to what Charlie said.
I mean, who would have thought that the UK wanting to run its own affairs and making our politicians more accountable would be so revolutionary? EU Parliament voted a majority to get rid of the vetoes, the last remaining scraps of democracy that the EU had. Now, luckily for EU citizens at the moment, it means a treaty change to actually go forward. But that is the mood. The ever closer union. We have dodged a federalised, globalist, international, power-gobbling, anti-democratic organisation, and that's worth more than a few trade and travel perks for a few wealthy people in this country.
Hear, hear. Belinda DeLucy, Charlie Mullins, great to see you both.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 12, and Dame Esther Rantzen has once again called for a vote on legalising assisted dying.
Yes, this comes as Jersey, the Isle of Man and Scotland consider legalising euthanasia for permanent residents. MPs warning that this will lead to a divergence from laws between different parts of the United Kingdom.
So should euthanasia be legalised in the UK as a whole? Well, GB News has been out on the streets asking what you think.
Why should they suffer when they're in agony? And this agony could go on for years. And is it fair to make people suffer? And not only do they suffer, their families are suffering with them.
I think there are going to be a lot of ramifications from this. I mean, they have it legalised in Switzerland, don't they? But it's really going to be something that for a long time the ruling class will have access to, because how expensive it will be. How feasible will it be for the NHS to be able to support it?
It's not an easy question to answer. Yes, it's not an easy question to say yes and no. I think we must go into it in depth.
Well, in theory, I don't see why it shouldn't be legalised, because everyone has a right to die in the way they want to.
Interesting to hear their opinions. I find this a very tricky one. I don't have a strong opinion either way. It's not a very nice thing to talk about, really, but it's something that certainly Esther Rantzen is pushing up the agenda. And I can understand. Of course I can understand. If you're going to... if you're going to be suffering...
And there are so many cases where the situation at the moment is just untenable, where people aren't really able to say goodbye to their loved ones. People are taking their own lives because they don't want their loved ones to be involved or complicit and then face charges of murder for something that their loved one wanted to happen. And it just creates this horrible situation that clearly we need to move on from. But as you say, Emily, there are some real pitfalls as well compared to where it's happened some parts of the world where there aren't the safeguards.
Yeah, people say slippery slope. Shall we speak to Dave Pearce, Director of Fundraising and Marketing for Dignity in Dying? Dave, you were just listening to the general public giving their view on this. It's a very difficult one for people to come down on one side or the other. What is your view?
I mean, my view is actually aligned with what all the polling on the issue shows, and that's that we should have a law for terminally ill, mentally competent adults to be able to control their manner and timing of their death if they're suffering unbearably. What's known as assisted dying, actually, rather than euthanasia, because the dying person is fully in control of that process themselves. They request a doctor to take them through the safeguards, but ultimately it's the dying person who's in control of that process. We've seen this week the Health Select Committee publish a report, and that report really destroys the current law. It shows that the current law is really dangerous. It's forcing people to make some really terrible choices, and it identifies the evidence that shows how we can change the law. For example, it found that if you have a law for terminal illness, that law is very unlikely to be extended. There's no evidence that that will happen. And also there's evidence that actually, if you legalise assisted dying, palliative care, end-of-life care improves. So there's lots that we can do to improve our law, but that at the moment is both dangerous and unpopular.
A lot of people who are instinctively opposed to this will point to some parts of the world, Canada, for instance, that seems to have a much, perhaps too liberal approach to it, with not enough conditions attached to this, and you find people who are in not terminal situations. Perhaps they have poor mental health, or there are some reports, I don't know how verified they are, of people just in sort of economic hardship who are considering it. And clearly it has been implemented in some parts of the world in far too liberal a way.
Well, I'm glad you raised Canada, because I'd like to be absolutely clear. No bill in Westminster has borrowed from Canada in terms of the type of law and safeguard that it wants. And basically, there are two types of law. There's these very broad laws, the type you see in Canada, and there's these very tightly controlled and specific laws like they have in every state in Australia and New Zealand. And that's what Dignity in Dying is campaigning for, and that's what we've been backing the calls of Esther Ransom for a vote. But we want that vote to be for terminally ill, mentally competent adults, because we believe that is the right balance of getting a law that is both safe and effective. And the law we have now, as I say, the Select Committee has made it very clear it cannot go on. I mean, both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer have backed calls for a vote. And now there's not time for that vote to come in this Parliament, but whoever wins the next coming general election, it's going to be a matter for Westminster to take control of at that point.
Dave, may I ask you personally why you're passionate about this?
I mean, I think like most people who support a change in the law, we have loved ones who we've seen suffering at the end of their lives, and we want something better for them. We want them to have the choice to control the manner and timing of their death. You know, that's what most people who support a change in the law are saying to us when they sign the government petition, for example, that's shot past 100,000 signatures and is likely to be debated in Parliament. The reason people are signing that in such vast numbers is because they've witnessed their loved ones suffering, and they want more choice for them. And then we know that the scale of that suffering is something like 17 people a day will suffer as they die. And that's even with the very best care in place. So the only way that we can get around that really difficult situation at the end of life is for Westminster to grasp this issue and allow time for a debate and a bill to come forward.
And what is the process by which that might happen? We've heard some very eloquent people in the House of Lords and the House of Commons speaking up for this, but ultimately I suppose it needs the government's backing. And would you be concerned if this happened in one part of the United Kingdom, but not the whole United Kingdom? If Scotland were to legalise this and then had some sort of tourism within the United Kingdom, for want of a better word, to access this sort of care?
With these types of laws, it's likely you would need to be resident in that country to access it. But you're absolutely right. We could end up with a situation that makes the current mess even worse, where Scotland has a law that allows dying people this choice, but we don't. And that's why the Select Committee has recommended that Westminster take action. It's that very specific issue of introducing even greater inequality into a very dangerous and unpopular situation already. So if a private member's bill comes forward, I don't expect the government to say, yes, this should be law, but the government and Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak have committed to this, should allow time for that bill to be fully and fairly debated, and then we can work out what is the right law for this country. And I would argue it is a law very much like they have in Australia that is both safe and compassionate.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Dave Pearce, Director of Fundraising and Marketing for Dignity in Dying.
Such a difficult one. And
Very difficult one.
I know people who feel very strongly on either side of this issue.
Yes, I've read about Canada. It does seem there's been a bit of a slippery slope there. People who you would never have thought would be able to access euthanasia-assisted dying are being able to.
Yeah. But interesting that in Australia and New Zealand it's a very different system and perhaps fewer problems or none of the problems that we're seeing in Canada.
Well, let us know what you think, gbviews@gbnews.com. But Prince William has been seen in public for the first time since missing his godfather's memorial service. We'll have the details after this break.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show.
Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seem to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger.
Okay.
And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 minutes to 1, and Prince William has been seen in public for the first time since pulling out of that service of Thanksgiving for his godfather.
Yes, Prince William met with young people and Holocaust survivors at the Western Marble Arch Synagogue in London. Well, joining us now from outside the synagogue is GB News Royal Correspondent Cameron Walker. So Prince William has been seen and he's been meeting with the Jewish community.
Yeah, he certainly has, Emily, and it still remains a complete mystery as to why he pulled out quite so last minute for that service of Thanksgiving for his godfather, King Constantine of Greece, on Tuesday. Kensington Palace today again insists the Princess of Wales is doing well, and actually the engagement day here at the synagogue was originally planned for Holocaust Memorial Day at the end of January, and it was going to be both the Prince and Princess of Wales attending, but of course due to the Princess's abdominal surgery and recovery, both the Prince and the Princess of Wales took time out from royal duties, and of course the Princess continues to recover. But this is the second of two engagements to do with the Middle East. If you remember last week, Prince William made headlines by visiting the Red Cross to hear about how they are supporting those trapped in Gaza with all the conflicts going on there. And he also attracted headlines by calling for the fighting to stop as soon as possible and for the hostages to be release. But today was all about tackling anti-Semitism here at the synagogue in central London, the Western Marble Arch Synagogue. As you said in your introduction, he met both Holocaust survivors, but he also spent a lot of time with young people here, and he told those young people, both Catherine and I are extremely concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism, and he wanted to really give that message of reassurance to those young people that he, as future king, stands with them at this time. Of course, there's been a huge rise of both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia since the October 7th terrorist attacks by the Hamas terrorists in Israel. So Prince William was here to give that reassurance, but of course it's off in the backdrop of all of the royal health scares which we've had. As I said, there's still been no explanation as to why Prince William wasn't there on Tuesday. It appears, though, that Prince William is keeping calm and carrying on, continuing with royal duties. He doesn't seem too concerned or worried about the princess. He was definitely putting on a brave face here. And he is actually expected tomorrow to be in Wales for to celebrate St David's Day with the people of Wales. So more details on that tomorrow, but it looks like it was just a blip on Tuesday when he had to pull out last minute for that service of Thanksgiving.
Yeah, strange that we don't have any information about it, and good to hear the reassurance from Prince William with regard to the Jewish community, but I do wonder, when are we going to hear words of reassurance about the Princess of Wales? And when might we first see her back in public?
Yeah, well, Kensington Palace, as I said, continue to insist that the princess is doing well. And as I suppose you've probably all seen on social media and such, there are a lot of questions as to exactly where the princess is. What we know is that the Princess of Wales had pretty major abdominal surgery at some point in January. She was in hospital for 2 weeks. She is now back home in Windsor recovering. It's thought she also spent the February half-term in Norfolk at Amner Hall with her family. Royal sources assure me that she is actually fine and recovering well, and they haven't changed their line that we're not expecting to see her until at least Easter. So it's always been planned since we understood that she'd gone in for surgery that we're not going to see the Princess of Wales until around Easter. So realistically, we're not going to see her in public for about another month. But of course, it's just one of a number of health scares and tragedies we've had with the royal family over the last few months, particularly with the death of Thomas Kingston, the Prince and Princess Michael of Kent's son-in-law, which was clearly a very, very tragic shock for the royal family. And that, plus the King's enlarged prostate, followed by the cancer diagnosis, I think there is just a general heightened of concern about members of the royal family, particularly with the Princess of Wales, because we haven't seen her since Christmas Day. That was the last time we publicly saw her, but not until at least Easter.
Cameron, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for your time. Cameron Walker there, our royal correspondent. Straight to the weather coming up. Mob rule replacing democratic rule. That's what the Prime Minister says.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. There's more unsettled weather to come as we go through the end of the week. Heavy rain, blustery showers and even snow for some of us. At the moment, there is an area of low pressure to the north of the UK, bringing blustery, showery weather to many parts, but it's a waving front in the southeast that's brought persistent rain already today and will continue to do so for a little while before the rain clears away as we go through this evening. Some drier weather then through the start of the night, albeit with a scattering of showers across northern parts, before some persistent and heavy rain with some hill snow pushes into parts of the southwest and into Wales. Elsewhere, where we see clearer skies through the night, we are going to see temperatures dropping. Watch out for some frost, some icy patches, also some fog and freezing fog first thing tomorrow. The most unsettled weather though tomorrow will be across parts of the southwest and in Wales. Heavy rain and some hill snow could cause some travel disruption, some localised flooding. Otherwise, the rain is going to spread across much of England and Wales, could bring some winteriness over higher ground in particular. The best chance of staying dry will be across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a chilly feel to all of us. Temperatures a little bit below average for the time of year. As we look towards the weekend, and we're going to still be under the influence of an area of low pressure that's going to bring more unsettled weather as we go through Saturday. Still the chance of more winteriness, but signs that Sunday is going to turn drier, albeit stay rather cloudy. Before then, we see the return to some more unsettled weather to start the working week. Temperatures rising a little bit too. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast.
every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
Comfortable ride, beautiful engines, smooth. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have two, but I don't...
You used to have 2 SUVs?
Well, one SUV at a time, but I had 2 brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you know, you can turn down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
Yeah, the growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem, maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks or, you know, they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
well, it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have, the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 29th of February.
Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer. That's the verdict of a Home Office-commissioned inquiry into the murder of Sarah Everard. Without a significant overhaul of police vetting, there could be nothing to stop another Couzens operating in plain sight. That's the report's author's warning.
And Rishi Sunak has warned that mob rule is replacing democratic rule as he pushes the police to do more to protect MPs. But the comments have sparked some outrage with human rights campaigners who say he is wildly exaggerating the issue. Who's right?
No whites allowed. A West End play faces criticism as it announces it will stage certain performances to an all-black audience, a black-only audience. Directors say it's free from the white gaze. Otherwise, others say it's simplistic and racist. We'll host a debate. Well, these stories are fascinating because...
Which one?
Because it seems to me that segregating audiences was something that happened in the United States in the 1950s.
But they don't want your white gaze there, Tom.
Is my gaze particularly concerning?
Well, perhaps yours. But not the white person's gaze in general. Do you know, this has come up before. I want to know how widespread this is, because it seems on the face of it absolutely outrageous for a play to have an all-black only evening showing. I think there's 2 days that this play will be shown only for black people. And I wonder, what if you're mixed race and you wanted to bring along your white mum or your white dad? I mean, you're just going to be turned away?
Go back to the awful racist elements of the United States Constitution. What was it, 1/8? If you're 1/8 black, you're counted as black. I mean, at what point are we going to start proportioning off people's genetics? It's madness.
Yeah, it is madness.
But more than that, what it is
racist.
It's exactly the rhetoric of the people who were opposed to marriages between different races. It's exactly the rhetoric of people who wanted separate but equal facilities in the United States. It's segregation.
Well, let us know what you think at home. GBViews at gbnews.com. Do you think it's wrong to have a showing of a play only for black people? No whites allowed? No white gays? Let us know. GBViews at
for all whites too.
Let's get to your headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 1. I'm Sophia Wenslet in the GB Newsroom. Your top story. The Home Secretary has told MPs police officers will be automatically suspended if they're charged with certain criminal offences. The comments come after Sarah Everard inquiry found Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer. He killed the 33-year-old in South London in March 2021. Her family says she died because he was a police officer and she would never have got into a stranger's car. Inquiry chairwoman Dame Aglioli has warned without a radical overhaul of police practices and culture, there's nothing to stop another Couzens operating in plain sight.
Even after Couzens' arrest and a review of his vetting clearance, the Metropolitan Police Service told the inquiry in 2022 that they would still have recruited him if provided with the same information. I found this astonishing. I make a number of recommendations to improve recruitment and vetting, covering everything from in-person interviews and home visits for new recruits to improvements for information sharing around transfers. In addition to the shortcomings in vetting and recruitment, the report shows very clearly how police investigations of indecent exposure were poor.
The Prime Minister has told police to use their powers to protect MPs after warning the UK is descending into mob rule. The government has already announced a £31 million package to boost security following safety fears. Concerns have been growing over MPs being targeted by protesters since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. Schools Minister Damien Hinds says the additional support is needed.
It's really important to protect our democracy. That's not just members of parliament, of course, but it includes members of parliament. We have a representative democracy, and it's really important that that can go about its business, that individuals can go about their business, and by the way, their staff members and families without fear. So I do think it's right that there is this focus. The police obviously do fantastic work, and we're all very grateful to them. And yes, I do welcome that focus that the Prime Minister has brought to protecting our democracy, our democratic process and democratic participation.
In other news, hotels for asylum seekers are costing the taxpayer £15 million a day, with Labour accusing the government of blowing its £1 billion budget. Home Office figures suggest the government spent £4.3 billion more of taxpayer money than budgeted on asylum support in the last year. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said this demonstrated the complete chaos in the asylum system left by the Conservatives. Dame Esther Rantzen is campaigning for a fresh debate on a vote for legalising assisted dying in the UK, saying the current law is a mess. She recently revealed she had joined the Dignitas assisted dying clinic in Switzerland after she was diagnosed with lung cancer. It follows a report which warned the government must consider what to do if the law changes in other parts of the UK. The issue is currently being considered in Jersey and the Isle of Man, both of which are British Crown dependencies. Some members of the public expressed their opinion on the issue.
I think there are going to be a lot of ramifications from this. I mean, they have it legalised in Switzerland, don't they? But it's really going to be something that for a long time the ruling class will have access to, because how expensive it will be, how feasible will it be for the NHS to be able to support it?
Well, in theory, I don't see why it shouldn't be legalised, because everyone has a right to die in the way they want to.
Why should they suffer when they're in agony? And this agony could go on for years. And is it fair to make people suffer?
The inquest into the death of Prince and Princess Michael of Kent's son-in-law will open tomorrow. Buckingham Palace announced Thomas Kingston, who was married to Lady Gabriella, died suddenly at an address in the Cotswolds on Sunday. In a joint statement, she paid tribute to her 45-year-old husband, describing his death as a great shock to the whole family. Gloucestershire Coroner's Court confirmed the inquest will open tomorrow at 2 p.m. And hairy biker star Dave Myers has died aged 66, less than 2 years after revealing his cancer diagnosis. Cy King, his motorcycling cooking duo partner, revealed the news on social media, saying he passed away peacefully at home with his family. He said he can't put into words how he's feeling at the moment, but everyone who loved Dave is devastated. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1, and a report into the rape and murder of Sarah Everard has found that her killer, Wayne Couzens, should never have been given a job as a police officer, and chances to stop the sexual predator were repeatedly ignored and missed.
The report also called for a complete overhaul of police vetting. So let's speak to our Home and Security editor for more on this. Mark, this report has highlighted a number of opportunities that were missed to stop this man from becoming a police officer.
Yeah, a catalogue of failings, not just affecting the Metropolitan Police, but the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, where Wayne Couzens worked for a time, and also Kent Police, where he was a volunteer police officer, a special constable, but in addition to that, he had come to their attention because of allegations of indecent exposure that were made on a number of occasions, but these inquiries were not, it seems, properly carried out according to Dame Angelini. She said that they were doomed to failure from the start, and the Metropolitan Police, the police service as a whole, has said that they do intend now to tighten up their vetting procedures and indeed to take issues around indecent exposure more seriously in the way that they manage those investigations. We've been hearing from the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, who obviously condemned the appalling acts carried out by Wayne Couzens, but he did say that the police service as a whole was already embarked on making improvements to ensure that they have much more robust vetting procedures. This is what he said.
Tragically, the report identifies that Couzens was completely unsuitable to serve as a police officer, and worse still, that there were multiple occasions where this could have been recognised. Lady Eilish found significant and repeated problems in recruitment and vetting throughout Couzens' career, including overlooking his chaotic financial situation.
Well, Yvette Cooper, his Labour counterpart, in highlighting all of those failures, actually said of the Home Secretary that she believed he was lacking really in his response so far. He said, and she said, it was too little, too late. Let's listen to Yvette Cooper.
Lady Angelini says, there is nothing to stop another Wayne Couzens operating in plain sight. So although I agree with most of what the Home Secretary has said, I have to be really blunt about this. His response is too weak. It is too little and it is too late. And the lack of urgency is unfathomable to me.
Well, the police service says, the National Police Chiefs Council, the various forces affected here say they are involved in trying to ensure that their vetting procedures are more robust. And when it comes to these issues of sexual offences that may have in the past been deemed to be minor, they will be more proactive in going after those investigations as well, and in trying to ensure that those alleged victims are properly managed in this process as well. And one of the concerns about the likes of indecent exposure is the potential for offending behaviour to escalate, and that's definitely what we saw in Wayne Couzens' case.
It's extraordinary reading some of the testimonies from some of those who were around Wayne Couzens as a police officer, who say they gave him nicknames for his behaviour, that this was almost joked about within the police before it was picked up on. Really extraordinary stuff. Mark White, thank you so much for bringing us the information there.
Yes, absolutely shocking. And how long will it take to improve vetting procedures? Yeah. These things don't just happen overnight. But moving on, mob rule is replacing democratic rule. Those are the words of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak as he calls for a more robust police response to intimidation, disruption and subversion.
It comes as the Home Office announced yesterday a package of £31 million aimed at protecting MPs in response to the domestic impact of the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict.
Well, joining us now is our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, very interesting to hear from a serving Prime Minister talking about how there's a growing consensus that mob rule is replacing democratic rule. It doesn't sound like he's in a position of strength with those words.
No, and you might wonder why the PM hasn't taken action before this. He's called police chiefs to number 10 and read the Riot Act to them, frankly. He said to them that the growing consensus that mob rule is replacing democratic rule. They want the police officers to ensure that their officers use existing powers to stop the feeling that the mob is taking over in some parts of the capital, particularly when there were these demonstrations we saw last Wednesday, when that language about sweeping Israel away was projected onto the Elizabeth Tower, which houses Big Ben. Now, our colleague Martin Daubney filmed the projector that was doing that, but no one went near it. The police stood by watching that being projected. That is against the law. So the big complaint, I think, from people, maybe the Jewish community, those who are concerned about Israel and the pressure it's getting from the Palestinian demonstrators here, is why on earth are the police not enforcing the laws they've got? We don't need more laws, just the police to enforce the laws they've got. And I think that's the change in tone that's being set by the Prime Minister today in Downing Street. Not everyone is happy about it. Amnesty International has said that talking of mob rule willfully exaggerates the issue and risks delegitimising the rights for peaceful protest. So not everyone agrees with the Prime Minister, but I think on top of the £31 million of taxpayers' money now being spent to protect MPs, giving them a hotline to police stations, giving them private security for those most at risk, there's I think a line in the sand was crossed last week.
Is it fair to say, sorry, just quickly, is it fair to say, Christopher, that there's a battle emerging between the police and the government here? Clearly, Rishi Sunak is not impressed with how the police have been acting with regards to these protests.
Yes, and of course policing is complicated. It's all very well for Rishi Sunak to sit in his protected office in Downing Street and order the police to be firmer with these demonstrators, but out on the street, police have got to weigh up the fact that if they do arrest people or they are tougher, it could inflame a very delicate situation. So they can't always step in when politicians want them to. And I think that is where there's a balance to be struck between allowing some things to pass in order to maintain the peace and stepping in, and that might kick off even more. So it's difficult for the police. The police do have a difficult job to do, but I think the line was crossed last Wednesday, and that's why the PM is stepping in today.
Now, Chris, there are rumours abound on another story today, which is concerning the budget. The budget which will be delivered in under a week now, on Wednesday. And the rumours are this, that a policy that Labour Party has been promoting for years now, and the Conservatives have been saying would actually decrease revenue to the Treasury, that the Conservatives have been saying would be a disaster for the competitiveness and attractiveness of the UK. Are we to believe that the Conservative Party are now considering this same policy?
There are informed reports today, Tom and Emily, that the government might try and axe or row back on this non-dom status. Around 60,000 people in this country, very rich people, pay a fee to avoid paying tax in the UK on earnings outside of the UK. It's been singled out by the Labour Party for some months now as a way to fund its programme of work if it forms a government. Now, what might happen is the Tory government could axe this measure. It could raise over £3.6 billion in tax. It would put the Labour Party into a position of trying to work out how it can fund its programme of government if it gets in charge. It seemed to be a way in the past of needling Rishi Sunak because, of course, his wife, Akshata Murthy, is a non-dom, but she voluntarily pays tax on her global earnings in the UK, although she's a non-dom, and it seems it would certainly hurt his own family finances were to do this. So I think this is, I would argue, rather clever politics by the Tory party. It may look quite difficult, I think, for people who believe that non-doms shouldn't be taxed more. It may lead to a flight of capital out of the UK from these high net worth individuals, but I think it does put the focus back on the Labour Party, and it does show a kind of a fleetness of foot if it happens next week's budget by the Tory government.
Yes, although the Liberal Democrats were quick off the mark this morning with a press release saying, Rishi Sunak can't talk about this issue because of his wife. He needs to recuse himself from this conversation. So there you go, making it about him personally.
I just don't understand. On what earthly metric is saying that the hyper-mobile global business class, suddenly if you make someone who might be, have business interests in India, on the business they do, selling things they make in India to Indian people, you have to pay tax on that in the UK. They're just not going to live in the UK anymore.
Yes.
Surely.
The taxman can't chase them if they decide to move. So there you go.
Flabbergasting. Christopher Hope, thank you very much for bringing us the latest on those two stories.
Now, a West End theatre is to stage shows for an all-black audience only to ensure ticket holders are, to quote, free from the white gaze. Are they right to do so? We're hosting a debate after this break.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become. I live there, it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place, and to walk away from that is really it's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, it's things like, in the past I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, what on earth's going on. But I've had two run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjem Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, so I wanted to go out and see people. And online, it's a picture of me saying, you're not welcome in our mosque, let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder. So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that,
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:22. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, a theatre in the West End is to stage shows for an all-black audience to ensure ticket holders are, to quote, free from the white gaze.
Now, Slave Play, that's the name of the play, which stars Kit Harington, opens at London's Noel Coward Theatre in June for a 3-month run and will offer 2 performances specifically for an all-black identifying audience, with the events known as Blackout Nights, intended to create a racially homogenous environment, free from the white gaze, as in the white view, in a move critics have branded simplistic and racist.
And I, as a critic, would brand it very offensive. But hey, we're going to have the debate. We're going to have the debate. I just think, before we get into our debate, I just want to say, how can anyone see this as progress?
Yeah. No, I think it's very hard. I'll be interested to hear what the case for this is, because I'm lucky enough to have grown up in a society that lauds people like Martin Luther King, who spoke about a sort of colourblind society, but it seems like we're moving far beyond that.
Yes.
In the realm of political discussion.
Well, let's get actor and writer Femi Nylander, who thinks this will have a positive impact. And we also have GB News presenter Martin Dobney, who, guess what, thinks the opposite. Excellent, a proper head-to-head. Let's start with you, Femi. Can you defend this one?
Well, I mean, I didn't come in here to say that it necessarily has a positive impact. What I did come in here to say is that, as you usually do, as you often do, you're focusing on the sensationalist headline, which is supposed to stir up this idea that there's anti-white sentiment and anti-white racism in the theatre industry, rather than looking at the realities, which are, of course, that this is just a one-off thing, and that the theatre industry itself is deeply biased towards those who are white in this country. I mean, in the 2015 research released by the Arts Council England found that people of colour represent 5% of employees in some London theatres, despite the city being up to 40% ethnic minority backgrounds. And
what's that got to do with the audience? What's that got to do with audience members?
The point here is that when you look at the audiences in London, have you ever been to the West End? Do you know how much money a ticket costs? Do you know what kind of course you have, right? But I mean, if I went to Brixton and asked people, most people probably wouldn't say...
I don't think they're discounting the tickets, Femi.
Are you going to let me speak, or are you just going to speak over me?
Go on.
Okay, thank you. What I'm saying is that the economic aspect, that black people usually have less money, and it's not about whether a discount. If they don't discount the tickets and they find that people don't come, well, then they'll lose out on money. The point here is that theatre in the UK has long been something that has been exclusive to people of a certain background, that has told the stories of people from a certain background. And I mean, you just have to look at the statistics. You have to look at the statistics in the entertainment industry. How many people in the entertainment industry are kind of your Eddie Redmaynes from Harrow and this, that, and the rest, to see that the entertainment industry is deeply classist and racist in many ways. And so the idea that you guys would never, ever do any shows about these actual structural issues or talk about these issues in any sense, and then get your knickers in a twist when one kind of show says, OK, we're going to have a black audience for a night, it's just quite humorous, to be honest. Just quite humorous.
Although some of the biggest shows on the West End, from Hamilton to Lion King to Six, all of these shows that people will know as household names, really, do have minority ethnic casts.
OK, so you've given 3 examples. Can you give any more than 3? Like, of course, we're talking. You can always give examples. There's hundreds of shows which go out every year. OK, Sweeney Todd. Right? Okay. Les Miserables. I can give you hundreds of examples of the opposite.
Martin to get his point of view on this one too. Femi's clearly saying that there's an issue with representation in the arts and in theatre. So therefore, having one night or 2 nights where there's black-only audiences really isn't that big a deal, Martin.
Well, segregation isn't the answer to perceived segregation. Racism isn't the answer to perceived racism. You're absolutely right to say there aren't that many black people in theatre audiences. There also aren't very many white working class people. I know, like, 'cause I'm one of them. When I've been to the theatre, there are very few people like me. It's ostensibly a white, liberal, well-off event because that's what most people who go to the theatre are. But this notion that we address this by keeping white people out of audiences, it does no favours to the entire cause. And to suggest that the theatre is racist, it's following hot on the heels of the countryside is racist. There are literally no barriers to anybody going to the theatre anywhere in Britain at any time, apart from the fact you can't afford it, perhaps, which is justifiable. And as I said, that also applies to white people. It applies to people on benefits, those from the north. It's a confected outrage, and it's actually designed, I think, to make us angry and get this response. That's why, in a sense, we should ridicule it. I mean, for example, would you be happy if we had an event where black people were banned?
Just to respond to your thing, I would be fine, and this plays into what you just said about the ideas of oppression. If there was a show, and this is a show about slavery, if there was a show about the experiences of working class Britons in the Victorian age, and they put up a thing saying, okay, well, this show is specifically for people from a certain income and background because we want to force a discussion afterwards and want to open it to people who are below, for example, £30,000 a year, I wouldn't have a problem with that because these are the people that are discriminated against, and this is a play which is talking to their own experience.
That's different from
in the same way. Segregation. Just let me say it. But I mean, it was Martin that drew the parallel between working class whites and blacks. It wasn't me that drew that parallel. You didn't challenge him when he drew that parallel. You only challenged me when I continue with his analogy. The point being, obviously, that we're talking about marginalized communities and a show which talks to their things. And we're not saying go on Tuesday. There's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And you're saying on the Wednesday matinee, one event is going to be like this. No one is saying it's not segregation like in the deep south of the United States where it was this swimming pool is for you and this swimming pool is for you. I'm just saying there's bigger things for us to focus on apart from you manufacturing some outrage over this and never talking about the actual problems of the theatre industry.
There's a lot of people that might be actually just a bit offended. We live in a multicultural society, and actually quite a lot of people might
People are offended by the stuff that you guys come out on with this channel every day.
Be offended that, you know, that some black people don't want to have white people in the audience. I mean, it's a bit of...
Well, no, it's a show about slavery. It's a show about white people. It's a show about white people taking black people across the Atlantic and forcing them to work for them for nothing and killing them and raping them, right? Okay, so that's the oppression. The oppression isn't you having to go on the Thursday afternoon instead of the Wednesday morning.
Martin.
Okay?
I just find this entire thing just almost absurd. It's like the way to educate people is not to keep them away from a painful message. The opposite surely is true.
Go on Thursday.
I'm for not segregating anybody from anything. Like you talk about having a show about white working class people and they should be the only audience. That's ridiculous. I would never want anything like that. Anybody should be free to enjoy any educational experience. If you want anybody to learn about the plight of slavery, the last thing that they're going to want to take part in is a show that they're actively banned from seeing. Can't you say
they're not banned from seeing it? They're saying that certain screenings will have a black audience. They're not saying they're banned from seeing it. Do you think go on the Wednesday, go on the Thursday? If you say one screening out of how many screenings, how is that banning them? No, it's just saying buy a ticket to another evening. No one is banned. It's not a swimming pool where it's whites only, blacks only. It's not a water fountain.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you the question again. Would you be satisfied if anywhere in Britain, at any point in time, there was any performance where black people weren't allowed to go, even for 1 hour? Would you be happy with that?
I can tell you now that I have been in numerous rooms in theatre, because I've worked in theatre, I've acted in London theatres, I've been in numerous spaces where I've been the only black people amongst hundreds of people, and this is a structural issue. A structural issue with which you have, I mean, banned structure, right? If black people can't access spaces, that's a structural issue, which is a very real issue.
But they can.
But it basically means if I'm a working class black kid from Brixton, as you said, you've brought in the thing that this is the rest. If I'm working, am I going to be at Les Miserables? Am I going to have the money to go to Les Miserables? Am I going to feel comfortable in that environment? These are structural questions, and you guys love to focus on the sensationalist.
Let me have a little say. I'm a working class lad. Right? I'm a coal miner from Nottingham. I've worked hard and earned money and got on in life. I haven't sat around moaning about it. I haven't sat around saying I'm oppressed. I've got my head down and I've earned enough money to get to the theatre. And so can anybody in this beautiful country. Stop moaning about being oppressed.
Does that change the history of Thatcher decimating mining communities? Does that change what the ruling class have done to the working class in this country? No, great, cool. You're one example of someone pulling...
about that anymore.
It's not about having a chip on your shoulder. It's about understanding structural issues rather than focusing on sensationalist headlines.
You both made excellent points. Thanks, Femi. Appreciate your time. And, of course, Martin. Martin, you're up next on the show. Martin, what's coming up? Thanks for that.
We'll have all the latest on the immigration figures, of course. Yeah, and we've got loads of stuff coming on, of course, Sarah Everard. And we've got a fascinating video of a rescue operation in French waters, 2 miles off French waters. And we see in real time as it goes into British waters and people are ferried back. This is a pick and drop-off issue. This is not containment. We've got an exclusive video. It's a sensational talking point.
Well, we look forward to seeing it. But, of course, coming up next on this show, Prince William has been visiting in central London for the first time that he's been seen in public since missing his godfather's memorial service. Where has he been? What's he been up to? And why has he been out? We'll have the details shortly.
It's 1:33. I'm Sophia Wenslet in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. The Home Secretary has told MPs police officers will be automatically suspended if they're charged with certain criminal offences. The comments come after the Sarah Everard inquiry found Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer. He killed the 33-year-old in South London in March in 2021. Her family says she died because he was a police officer and she would never have got into a stranger's car. Inquiry chairwoman Dame Angiolini was warned without a radical overhaul of policing practices and culture, there's nothing to stop other Couzens operating in plain sight. The Prime Minister has told police to use their powers to protect MPs after warning the UK is descending into mob rule. The government has already announced a £31 million package to boost security following safety fears. Concerns have been growing over MPs being targeted by protesters since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. Dame Esther Rantzen is campaigning for a fresh debate on legalising assisted dying, saying the current law is a mess. She recently revealed she joined the Dignitas clinic in Switzerland after being diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. A report is urging the government to consider what to do if the law is changed in other parts of the UK. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2639 and €1.1674. The price of gold is £1,607.33 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,664 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel. So join me, Tom Harwood, for the Rochdale by-election results. From midnight through to 6 a.m, we'll discover the twists and turns of the most unpredictable by-election in a long time.
He should be celebrating. I mean, it's left hearing it, you know.
And from 6 a.m. Friday, join Michael Portillo on GB News Breakfast for his take on the results. GB News, Britain's election channel. 2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney.
Weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of 3 abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel, and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures. Endless red tape, as Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain. They've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:39. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, Prince William has been seen in public for the first time since he pulled out of the service of Thanksgiving for his godfather.
The Prince of Wales has been meeting with young people and Holocaust survivors at the Western Marble Arch Synagogue in London.
There's some new pictures of him there at the synagogue. But joining us now is royal biographer and commentator Angela Levin. Angela, Prince William pictured out and about today, meeting members of the Jewish community. Any ideas of why he may not have appeared at the memorial service?
No, I don't know. I mean, one person said to me that one of the children had a real sort of tantrum and he decided to stay, but that's the only thing I've had, and I haven't had it confirmed. So no idea, really.
I suppose it would make sense that he's having to do most of the parenting work, given that the Princess of Wales is still recovering. But of course, Angela, as you'll know, there's been fraught speculation in this country and beyond about how the Princess of Wales is doing, and frankly, about where she is too. Do we know anything about that?
No, we don't. I mean, I think they're doing a very good job, that they're keeping her very quiet and quite aware. I think at one point she was going to be with her parents, and then in the other she is in Sandringham. But she hasn't been out that any of us have seen. But I suppose that's what she needs to do, really. If she's had a major operation, she needs to rest. She needs to be looked after very carefully and feel somewhere feel comfortable and wherever she is. And I'm sure they're looking after her very well. And there'll be lots of doctors and physios perhaps as well to help her get her mobility back slowly but surely. I think she'll be very pleased about that because she is so athletic. But we don't know anything. But it must be very stressful for all of them. And I think for the children as well, they need to see them mummy and be with her closely. I think the older two will probably be extremely kind because they realise she's not well. well, and Louis will need loads of cuddling because he really would need that from his mother. He wouldn't quite understand. And I think that she's got a piano nearby, but I don't think she'd play that because that affects things in your stomach. I know, I was a pianist once. You don't actually do that sort of thing, but I think she will just be quiet, speak to her sister Pippa, speak to her mother, speak to a few friends, but not for too long.
You don't buy into any of the speculation, Angela, that there's something deeper going on here?
Well, I think it's ridiculous to say that when you don't know. We just have to wait, don't we? I think if she doesn't appear after Easter, then there would be some cause for more concern. But everybody needs to recover from an operation in their own way. And some operations take a lot of care and quietness and gentleness.
And a huge responsibility on the shoulders of Prince William. He's out today with his duties. He'll be tomorrow in Wales to celebrate St David's Day. So he's got a busy agenda, and there's a slimmed-down monarchy.
Yes, there is a slimmed-down monarchy. I'm one of the people who feel that this is a very unlucky time, but you don't actually want royals who are not that interested, who aren't loyal, and who won't do a good job. I think all of us go through difficult patches, and you come out and you're okay again. And that's how I think of the royal family. You must have people who are dedicated and who will really care. I mean, Queen Camilla has been absolutely amazing. She's working incredibly hard. She's obviously spending a lot of time with the king, and yet she's just doing things as if it's all so easy and what they do, and they will continue to do that. And I think that attitude helps everybody.
Now, Angela, The Sun is reporting that Gary Goldsmith, now this is the Princess of Wales' uncle, will be going into the celebrity Big Brother house next week. Surely that can't help the situation.
I don't think it does help the situation. He is one of those relatives who needs a lot of attention and wants, to get some money, presumably, from doing that. Although he is a millionaire, I believe, but he would like to make money out of it. And I think that's a shame. The thing is, he probably thinks he can control whatever he says and he becomes famous. But actually, if the cameras are running all the time, you can easily slip, and he could say something completely inappropriate. But that will get people watching. I think it's the wrong thing to do, particularly at the wrong time. He should have said, look, I'm sorry. I don't want any questions about my niece, and I won't be coming.
Yes, it's probably the last thing the royal family want Catherine's uncle to go into celebrity Big Brother.
I know. They don't need any more aggravation, do they? Worry, not at all.
No, all a little bit embarrassing, perhaps. But thank you very much, Angela. Always great to speak to you. Angela Levin, their royal biographer and commentator.
I don't think I could ever do that to anyone in my family.
I don't. Yes, I mean, I wouldn't want any family member to go into the Big Brother house.
But I mean, it's almost like an act of sabotage. Or just deep selfishness.
Yeah.
Really?
I guess it pays well. Coming up, we've been asking what you think about a West End production for an all-black audience.
That's not an audience of the New Zealand rugby team. That is an audience of all ethnic minority participants.
We'll be reading some of your views very shortly.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods are
And remember,
being
a lot of
trashed.
people who work in the farm industry, Malone,
get paid very little money.
They get paid.
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Piers. And, you know, the profits... I think on Clarkins Farm, I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something.
Right.
And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that are being passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. You know, I'm all for green protests, you know, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You know, you can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead.
The Tata Steel thing.
Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. You know, lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting, you know, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you say
can't
you
get any more
support some of
obvious.
these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message.
Any of them.
But I do appreciate the message. Yeah, but sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel. So join me, Tom Harwood, for the Rochdale by-election results. From midnight through to 6 a.m, we'll discover the twists and turns of the most unpredictable by-election in a long time.
He should be celebrating. I slept during it, you know.
And from 6 a.m. Friday, join Michael Portillo on GB News Breakfast for his take on the results.
GB News, Britain's election channel.
Right, well, we have lots of views coming in about the debate we just had. The debate we just had about this this theatre show that's going to have 2 nights where they have a blackout, which means that they'll only have black guests in the audience. And lots of you have things to say about this. Paul says, what happens on black-only night when a mixed-race person turns up? Well, presumably, they said black identifying. So if you're mixed race and you identify as black, then of course you'll be allowed in.
I can see
what if you want to bring a friend?
What
if you want to bring a friend who's white?
With black identifying.
Yes.
I can see a world of troubles where some joker will turn up to that performance who isn't black and has no black ancestry and just say, I identify.
Because of legal issues, they're not actually allowed to just sell tickets under the banner of only for black people. But so what they're doing is they're selling the tickets through black community groups to get around those legal challenges. Barbara says, does making it possible for only my black husband to be able to attend but not me create more harmony? Well, yes, Barbara, you wouldn't be allowed to go. Your husband would have to go on his own. That's nice, isn't it?
James says the theatre is only doing this for 2 nights, so it should be made into more than it is. Of course, this is running for many, many weeks, and only 2 nights
well, that's
doing
fair enough, but this has happened before with another theatre production, and I'm sure it will happen again. And I understand that, yes, at some theatre productions, what Femi was saying earlier, some theatre productions, the audiences are, by and large, mostly white people, from theatre performances I've been to in the West End anyway. But is this really the answer? Is this the answer?
Now, of course, Hugh says, which country stopped slavery? And it was, of course, the United Kingdom that did more than any other country in the history of the world to stop slavery. In fact, I think it's quite interesting that when we refer to the sort of civil rights movement, we always refer to the Americans, an American sort of... We never refer to people like Wilberforce, who worked so hard in this country to kick off this anti-slavery movement. We don't mention Lord Liverpool, who made it a condition of the Congress of Vienna when the Napoleonic Wars were all being wrapped up and the new concert of Europe was being decided. A condition of that was that all of the countries sign up on the British's insistence to stop the slave trade. And one final fact.
There you go. There's your history lesson for the day.
One final fact.
Always educational.
In Brazilian politics, they have a phrase.
Go on.
I don't know the Portuguese for it, but it's basically a rule for the English to see. And that means a rule that no one abides by.
Right.
And the origin of this phrase is that when Britain ruled the waves and we were facilitating trade with Brazil,
right,
we would only trade with Brazil if they wrote it into their constitution that they would ban slavery. And they did that and carried on doing slavery anyway, and they called it a law for the English to see.
Well, thank you for the TED Talk. Anyway, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will deliver his budget next week, and he's rumoured to be considering scrapping the non-dom or non-domiciled tax status after previously long defending the arrangement. Curious.
So is this non-dom or non-dumb? Well, joining us now is political editor Christopher Hope to try and get to the bottom of what could be a screeching U-turn. Chris, is this smart politics or non-dumb politics?
Nice one, Tom. Yeah, I think it is quite smart politics. It shows a degree of manoeuvrability. Yes, of course, you're right. It goes against what previous Tory chancellors, including Jeremy Hunt, has said before about this idea of scaring off wealth and forcing a flight of capital. There's around 55,000 people, 0.08% of the population are non-DOMs. It means that they are foreigners who reside in the UK. They can avoid paying tax the first 7 years here. After that, they pay £30,000 a fee to avoid paying the tax here on their global earnings, rising to £60,000 after 12, if they're here from 12 out of the past 14 years. So it's a way of just keeping people here who are well off, and of course they pay money elsewhere, and the revenue can make money of them as they purchase goods, etc., while they're here. It would raise £3.6 billion initially, and that's the idea. The government, the Chancellor, looking around for money. He's got maybe headroom of £15 billion, and how he spends that elsewhere on tax cuts.
I'm not sure this is smart politics,
what we're starting to think about now in Westminster.
I'm not sure if this is smart politics, really, though, because it just looks as though, well, yeah, besides the economics point, but it just looks as though they're stealing a Labour policy. I mean, how does that make the government look strong?
Well, the truth will out next week, Emily, but I think what it does do, it forces the Labour to find money elsewhere. It boxes the Labour Party in terms of how they might try and raise money if they win power. I think that's why it might work, and I think that some would say, it's not clear whether this will cause a flight of capital, people leaving the country who are well off. They're going to find different ways to shelter their money. But it might be a way of trying to force Labour into a position trying to find new ways to raise money. I mean, there are other options. They're looking now where they want to try and cut the base rate of income tax made by 2%, and that's £13 billion. A 2p cut in NICs, national insurance, to £9 billion, bring that down to the self-employed level. There's all sorts of options for them, but I just think it shows a bit of fleet of foot in terms of political nous. But I do agree it will be a big debate in the party, Emily and Tom.
They're just giving up on their arguments. They're saying they were making sensible arguments before, and now it's all plain politics.
Where's the ideological continuity? Anyway, coming up, Labour research says the government is forking out a whopping £15 million a day on asylum seeker hotels. More on that after the break.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. There's more unsettled weather to come as we go through the end of the week. Heavy rain, blustery showers and even snow for some of us. At the moment there is an area of low pressure to the north of the UK, bringing blustery, showery weather to many parts, but it's a waving front in the southeast that's brought persistent rain already today and will continue to do so for a little while before the rain clears away as we go through this evening. Some drier weather then through the start of the night, albeit with a scattering of showers across northern northern parts before some persistent and heavy rain with some hill snow pushes into parts of the southwest and into Wales. Elsewhere, where we see clearer skies through the night, we are going to see temperatures dropping. Watch out for some frost, some icy patches, also some fog and freezing fog first thing tomorrow. The most unsettled weather, though, tomorrow will be across parts of the southwest and in Wales. Heavy rain and some hill snow could cause some travel disruption, some localised flooding. Otherwise, the rain is going to spread across much of England and Wales, could bring some winteriness over higher ground in particular. The best chance of staying dry will be across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a chilly feel to all of us. Temperatures a little bit below average for the time of year. As we look towards the weekend, and we're going to still be under the influence of an area of low pressure that's going to bring more unsettled weather as we go through Saturday. Still the chance of more winteriness, but signs that Sunday is going to turn drier, albeit stay rather cloudy. Before then, we see the return to some more unsettled weather to start the working week. Temperatures rising a little bit too. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions. We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 29th of February.
A new record. Over 62,000 people were granted asylum in the UK last year. That's the highest number since records began. Now, the backlog may be down, but could quick decision-making on asylum applications come back to haunt the Home Office?
Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer. That's the verdict of a Home Office commissioned inquiry into the murder of Sarah Everard. Without a significant overhaul of police vetting, there is nothing to stop another Couzens operating in plain sight, warns the report's author.
And anarchy in the UK. Rishi Sunak has warned that mob rule is replacing democratic rule as he pushes the police to do more to protect MPs. But the comments have sparked outrage with human rights campaigners saying he is wildly exaggerating the issue. Who's right?
Now, we will talk about big things, but I do just want to say I, in the break, Googled what the Portuguese is for a law for the English to see.
Go on.
A law para inglês ver. I think I've got para inglês ver. And it's a phrase in Brazil.
Fantastic pronunciation, I must say.
I actually, yeah, I've been practising.
I thought I was sitting next to a Brazilian.
Yeah, I'm actually very good at football as well.
Oh, yes, I don't believe that.
But it comes from 1826 when we signed a treaty to outlaw the slave trade in Brazil, but it continued for another 6 decades and they lied to the English. And now when they're talking about laws that sort of aren't abided by, it's a law para inglês ver.
And if you're joining us now and you have absolutely no idea why Tom is talking about this, it's because we did get onto slavery. And it went from there, didn't it?
It did. Well, I just think the United Kingdom actually has an incredibly proud legacy on slavery, done more than any other country in the history of the world to end the global slave trade. And I think that should be more recognised.
Well, there we go. Something to be proud of. GB Views at gbnews.com. But first, your headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story. The Home Secretary has told MPs police officers will be automatically suspended if they're charged with certain criminal offences. The comments come after the Sarah Everard inquiry found Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer. He killed the 33-year-old in South London in March 2021. Her family says she died because he was a police officer and she would never have got into a stranger's car. Inquiry chairwoman Dame Angelini has warned without a radical overhaul of policing practices and culture, there's nothing to stop another Couzens operating in plain sight.
Even after Couzens' arrest and a review of his vetting clearance, the Metropolitan Police Service told the inquiry in 2022 that they would still have recruited him if provided with the same information. I found this astonishing. I make a number of recommendations to improve recruitment and vetting, covering everything from in-person interviews and home visits for new recruits to improvements for information sharing around transfers. In addition to the shortcomings in vetting and recruitment, the report shows very clearly how police investigations of indecent exposure were poor.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has told police to use their powers to protect MPs after warning the UK is descending into mob rule. The government has already announced a £31 million package to boost security following safety fears. Concern has been growing over MPs being targeted by protesters since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. Schools Minister Damien Hines says the additional support is needed.
It's really important to protect our democracy. That's not just members of parliament, of course, but it includes members of parliament. We have a representative democracy, and it's really important that that can go about its business, that individuals can go about their business, and, by the way, their staff members and families without fear. So I do think it's right that there is this focus. The police obviously do fantastic work, and we're all very grateful to them. And yes, I do welcome that focus that the Prime Minister has brought to protecting our democracy, our democratic process, and democratic participation.
Hotels for asylum seekers is costing the taxpayer £15 million a day, with Labour accusing the government of blowing its £1 billion budget. Treasury figures suggest the Home Office spent £4.3 billion more than budgeted on asylum accommodation last year. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says it demonstrates the complete chaos in the system. And it comes as the latest figures show illegal migration has fallen, but legal migration is up. The government data also reveals small boat arrivals in 2023 were down 36% on the previous year. However, the UK granted asylum to over 62,000 people in 2023, the highest level ever recorded. Assisted dying must be addressed, with MPs warning the government that a plan is needed if laws are passed on Jersey and the Isle of Man. Dame Esther Ranson is among the voices calling for a fresh debate and a vote in the UK, saying the current legislation is a mess. She recently revealed she's joined the Dignitas clinic in Switzerland after being diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The public's been giving their opinion on the matter.
I think there are going to be a lot of ramifications from this. I mean, they have it legalised in Switzerland, don't they? But it's really going to be something that for a long time the ruling class will have access to, because how expensive it will be, how feasible will it be for the NHS to be able to support it?
Well, in theory, I don't see why it shouldn't be legalised, because everyone has a right to die in the way they want to.
Why should they suffer when they're in agony? And this agony could go on for years. And is it fair to make people suffer?
And Harry biker star Dave Myers has died aged 66, less than 2 years after revealing his cancer diagnosis. Cy King, his motorcycling cooking partner, revealed the news on social media, saying he passed away peacefully at his home with his family. He said he can't put into words how he's feeling at the moment, but everyone who loved Dave is devastated. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 2, and a report into the rape and murder of Sarah Everard has found that her killer, Wayne Couzens, should never have been given a job as a police officer. And the chances to stop the sexual predator were repeatedly ignored or missed. The report also called for a complete overhaul of police vetting.
Well, joining us now is former police chief superintendent and whistleblower in the Met, Parm Sandhu. Thank you very much for joining us. I guess for most people listening to what's come out of this inquiry is the number of red flags, the numbers of missed opportunities that there were in 3 police stations, under 3 police areas. I mean, it boggles the mind, really, how this man was missed.
This is such a sad story that ended in the death of Sarah Everard. And it's really shocking when you actually read through the report. There are 3 different forces involved. There's Kent, there's Met Police, and there's also the CNC, which is a civil nuclear constabulary. So 3 different forces employed this man who should never have been a police officer. His offending history goes back to 1995, which is before he even applied to join the police service within Kent. And then from there, he's transferred across to the Met Police office, Met Police, and actually carried a gun. So not only did he have a warrant card, which gave him the power to abduct, abuse, rape and murder Sarah Everard, he also had a gun. We entrusted him with a gun, which is absolutely appalling. And when you actually read through the reports, there are a number of different incidents where he was reported for indecent exposure, masturbating, sharing pornography at work, and none of those instances were investigated properly, and he was allowed to stay in policing. But what really is quite disturbing about this report is that this report follows the Dame Louise Casey report, which was published in March last year, and that follows the HMIC report, which was published the year before in 2022. The recommendations are very similar in all 3 reports. So we're having report after report saying the same thing, saying that we need to look at the vetting, we need to look at recruitment, and we need to look at re-vetting and HR processes. But the activity, the actions, don't seem to be following these reports.
You know, it is extraordinary that these same themes keep coming back and back and back. But Parm, I want to ask you about your whistleblowing and whether you sort of see echoes of your own experience in this one.
I do. And before I answer that question, I'm just going to say that the majority of police officers are good, caring individuals who are there for the right reasons. But there are a few who should never have been allowed into policing and should never have been allowed to remain. And the problem that I had and that others like me have is that there isn't a safe environment to report to colleagues. So if you notice something about your colleague and you think, that's not right. He shouldn't be doing that at work, or you're uncomfortable with that person's behaviour. If you report that behaviour, you then become the target and you become the person who's investigated. And if I can just explain a little bit further, the reason for that is that the police mark their own homework. So when you report somebody, when you put in a complaint, as a member of the public, when you put in a complaint or as a serving police officer, it goes to a complaints department. The complaints department is staffed up by police officers. They're not independent. They could have been out drinking with Wayne Couzens the week before, or they could be going to play golf this coming Saturday with Wayne Couzens. So they're actually investigating people that they worked with, that they socialise with, that are friends of theirs. And one of the recommendations that was made last year from the Dame Louise Casey report was that complaints department should be taken outside of policing and it should be independent. That hasn't happened. And again, you see those recommendations coming up year after year with no real activity.
Is there something about policing that can attract bad people, do you think?
There is, absolutely, because once you get that warrant card, it gives you power. It gives you power to stop and detain people. It gives you power over, detention, over the treatment, how you behave towards people. And it's a known fact, it's been said many times, that policing will attract people who are attracted by the power of the warrant card. Now, add to that the power of carrying a firearm or weapons, because one of the things that Wayne Couzens was accused of, and it wasn't investigated properly, was that he was off duty wearing a police belt with all of his equipment on it. That wasn't investigated properly, that wasn't dealt with. And not only that, he was living in Kent, working in the Met, so he's taking his equipment home with him, which again is an offence. So it does attract bullies, it attracts people who shouldn't be in policing. And one of the HMIC reports in 2022, Matt Parr actually said that the wrong type of people can apply and become police officers and then can remain as police officers. So there isn't that re-vetting process that will weed out these individuals.
How concerned are you about the drive to recruit 20,000 extra police officers that we've seen since 2019? A big initiative by the government to hit this target to get more police in. Do you think there's a risk that within that drive of recruitment, corners might have been cut, that the vetting standards that we would expect might have been missed again in some cases?
Vetting processes will be missed in that cohort, but also in the cohort before. I'm not going to say that it's because the recruitment targets. I welcome those recruitment targets because those numbers are actually replacing officers that have already resigned, left or retired. So it's not actually, in my view, it's not an increase. It's just keep maintaining numbers. But some of the vetting processes go back years and years, and we can't say that these are all new people. These are people that joined 20, 30 years ago, but are only being picked up now. So that target, that recruitment procedure has got nothing to do with the likes of Wayne Couzens, absolutely nothing. And what worries me is that Dame Elish has actually said there could be another Wayne Couzens operating in plain sight. So there could be another Wayne Couzens who's going into policing today and tomorrow and walking around the streets.
Well, on that note, thank you very much indeed, Parm Sandhu, former police chief superintendent and a whistleblower in the Met. Well, there you go. Can't cut corners when it comes to vetting our police officers.
You can't, and chilling at the end there, that there could be more people just operating in plain sight. Let's hope they're combed out.
Well, the UK granted asylum to a record number of people last year, with Home Office data released this morning showing over 62,000 people were granted refugee status or other protection following an application in 2023.
The news comes as it's also revealed that the government is forking out a whopping £15 million a day, putting up asylum seekers in hotels. That's more than £4.3 billion more of British taxpayer money than was budgeted for asylum support in the last year. And that's according to research from the Labour Party.
Yes, Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said the shocking figures demonstrate the complete chaos in the asylum system left by the Conservatives. So we can now speak with immigration barrister Paul Turner. Paul, so over 62,000 people were granted asylum in this country last year, a record high. To many, that will seem unsustainable.
Well, yes, it may do. I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. One is that the UK has got its act together and is granting status to people that deserve it. And secondly, that the UK has lost control of its borders. The answer is probably somewhere in the middle. But it's important to note that the reason why there have been so many grants is because the Home Office actually did get its act together a little bit in making a large number of decisions towards the end of last year. And then the other point, which has to be borne in mind, is that of the 10 most productive countries, if you can call it that generate asylum seekers, places like Afghanistan, Syria, Sudan and Eritrea, 99% of the people are accepted by the Home Office as being genuine refugees. So you could say it's an abject failure, or you could say that the UK is fulfilling its international obligations.
It's always difficult in these settings because we've signed up to these treaties that were formulated, often written by the British in the wake of the Second World War, in a world before the jet engine and before the sort of mass migration that we see today. And to some people, it does seem very, very strange that, given these obligations that we have signed up to, our international obligations are, in many cases, could be assessed, if everyone so choose to come to the UK, there would be billions of people around the world who would theoretically be eligible for asylum in this country.
Well, you are completely right. According to the UN definition, or the UNHCR definition of a refugee, anyone fleeing on the basis of their race, ethnicity, as a number of two of the criteria, would qualify. Obviously, it's very difficult for very poor people in, say, sub-Saharan Africa to make their way to the United Kingdom. I mean, it has to be borne in mind that the concept of refugees and persecution does go back to pre the Second World War. And you are right. I think it was a British barrister that wrote an awful lot of the ECHR. And it was supported by Winston Churchill. So I think that it's important to put it into context, and that might sound a lawyerly answer, but if one looks at the 60 or 70,000 people that claimed asylum last year, and you put that in the context of the 1.3 million people that were granted visas to enter the United Kingdom, it's quite clear that the irregular entrants to the United Kingdom, of which 2/3 are entitled to be here under international law, it's 95% arrived lawfully and 5% arrived irregularly. Now, it seems that the focus can be unfairly on asylum seekers when there's a bigger picture here, which is the 1.3 million people that were granted leave to enter the country lawfully.
Paul, a lot of people would assume that our asylum system would prioritise women and children, but in fact, the figures show that it is mostly adult males who have been granted asylum in this country. They account for the majority. It seems to some that perhaps there is a bit of a first-come, first-serve basis for our asylum system, rather than actually granting asylum to the people who most need it.
Well, Emily, I completely agree with you. I mean, women and children, and the UK does have an obligation to look after or put the children's best interests first, often miss out. Whereas a lot of the migrants that come here that are easy to process would be, say, single males that have made the journey from Afghanistan, for example, or Syria. And that probably skews the figures. But there are good legal arguments as to why women and women and children ought to have their claims prioritised. And it can seem a little unsettling that if you have enough money to get here and you're a young, fit, single male from Afghanistan, you've got a much better chance of getting status quicker than if you are an unaccompanied child.
I suppose that's an argument about safe and legal routes more than anything else, Paul.
Well, this is something that I've harped on about, and I know many of my colleagues have. If there were safe and legal routes, then the genuine migrants could be weeded out in, say, countries next to a country that is troubled, and then people could be granted visas and then could make their way to the United Kingdom. It could be done in a more orderly manner. And it would mean that genuine people, and not just people that come from a poor country but family have money.
Paul, do you think more safe and legal routes would actually stop people from coming by irregular means? I'm not sure it would in practice.
It may or it may not. What you need to, what I would say is necessary from a legal point of view, is that, and the government did pass a bill saying that if you claimed asylum and you arrived by way of a small boat, you were going to be declared inadmissible. Now, if there was a safe and legal route and you could go from, say, Afghanistan, for example, to Pakistan and have your asylum claim processed, and then come to the UK lawfully, be received, have your status, and if you came irregularly or you were travelled by a small boat and you were denied the opportunity to claim asylum, you were denied housing or given the minimum housing, and you were removed, then that would make it less attractive as a business model to the people traffickers that, quite frankly, get rich out of this.
Well, Paul Turner, immigration barrister, thank you very much for your expert analysis on this prickly situation.
Yes, and we're all left with the bill. Well, £15 million a day.
This is the extraordinary thing, especially with the very slow processing that we have. I think there are lots and lots of people who would say there are lots of genuine refugees whom we should offer sanctuary to. I'm not sure that every single genuine refugee needs a hotel room or needs a flat paid for by the British taxpayer. You can be generous with your immigration system without being generous with your welfare system.
Well, and also, I mean, the government, weren't they saying only a few weeks ago that it was £7 million a day? So I'm not sure where this £15 million a day has come from, because that is a lot more. Anyway, a West End theatre is to stage shows for an all-black audience to ensure ticket holders are, to quote, free from the white gaze. Are they right to do so? We're speaking to an actor after this short break.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States, our key allies, will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage. But I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Antony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals. We've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel. So join me, Tom Harwood, for the Rochdale by-election results. From midnight through to 6 a.m, we'll discover the twists and turns of the most unpredictable by-election in a long time.
You should be celebrating. I mean, I slept during it, you know.
And from 6 a.m. Friday, join Michael Portillo on GB News Breakfast for his take on the results.
GB News, Britain's election channel.
Right, it's 2:25. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, a West End theatre is to stage shows for an all-black audience to ensure ticket holders are, to quote, free from the white gaze.
Well, Slave Play, which stars Kit Harington, opens at London's Noel Coward Theatre in June for a 3-month run, which will offer 2 performances specifically for an all-black identifying audience.
Yes, the events known as Blackout Nights are intended to create a racially homogenous environment free from the white gaze in a move critics have branded simplistic and racist. Well, there you go. Some have said that. Some have said, you know, it's only 2 nights. Why not?
Well, let's get the view of an actor. Charlie Lawson joins us now. And Charlie, thank you for making the time for us. A lot of people are really struggling to get their heads around this. It seems to many that it's sort of society going backwards.
Yeah, look, I think it's a bit bloody silly myself, but there again, you know, I probably would, wouldn't I? But look, free from the gaze of the white man, and I believe people find it very intimidating going into the theatre. If you happen to be a black man or whatever, I have to say, feeling safe. I mean, have you ever been to the audience at the Barbican? You know what I mean? If you're scared of them, you've got big problems, let me tell you. But look, I took the time to ask 3 of my fellow actors who happen to be black, who incidentally did not want to be identified because of the repercussions, and that says a lot for itself. 2 of them said they thought it was very silly, and one of them said it was a good thing. Do you know what? Personally, I'm not a theatre goer, so I don't think I wouldn't go far as calling it racist, although I get where that's coming from. I understand the argument. Of course, it's turning everything arse about face. I mean, if you wanted to sort of say, I mean, imagine if there was a Jewish performance for Jews only in London, for God's sake, in the West End. You would have every supporter you see on a Saturday up Shaftesbury Avenue. The cast would be under threat. The production would be under threat. The front of house staff would be under threat. So, you know, to me, it's, well, I suppose you can say the producer, director, writer, whatever, they've got the publicity they want because the show will be rammed. But
Charlie, do you think that's what this is about? Do you think it's just? I mean, they've got a month's long run. They've put in 2 Wednesdays that will be all black. Perhaps they weren't selling a lot on Wednesdays. Maybe they just want the discussion. They want the controversy.
No, I suspect. Look, the acting. I can be as socialist as you want when it comes to the arts, which wouldn't be my natural sort of training ground, but I can be because I care deeply about the arts. I know how politically engaged some people are on the left. I mean, they really are. You know what I mean? And it's as simple as that. That's just what our business is about. I would be one of the few people who ended up arguing with them because they don't scare me at all. But look, I would genuinely believe that the people who've made this decision have done it for political reasons. Now, I don't think they're doing it as a gimmick to get bums on seats, but I do think they know exactly what they're doing.
Charlie, just quickly, you said you had asked 3 black actor friends of yours, and 2 thought it was a silly idea. One of them agreed with it. Did you ask why he thought it was a good idea?
Because he felt that Black Lives Matter, and that was the chorus, and I had to shut up for 2 minutes. But you know, look, that's the way he is. He's always been left of centre, if you will. I know he took part actively in Black Lives Matter marches. Even though, as I said, well, you weren't allowed to mingle, for Christ's sake. It was the middle of COVID and you were wearing a frigging mask. You know what I mean? Make your mind up. But so that this is his natural ground. So he didn't surprise me. The other two guys I spoke to, would have been more just sort of smiled and said, look, I just think it's really silly. And why should we be doing this? We've fought hard for our rights in the theatre. We are now being recognised in televisual circles. You've only got to look at casting now to know that it's radically changed over the last 10 years. And my two compadres appreciated that. And we're happy the way the progress of our business was going.
Yeah.
A gentleman to the left of me, however, wanted to take over the planet.
Well, you're absolutely right to say that there's been a huge progress in terms of representation. But I guess this is about the audiences too. But, I mean, it's great to get your perspective as well, seeing as you've actually spoken to people in the business who are black themselves and to get their reaction. Sorry, that's all we've got time for, though. Charlie, great to speak to you. Charlie Lawson there, actor, of course.
Now it's the Chancellor's budget next week, with Jeremy Hunt expected to make some big announcements. But could they affect you? Well, we will be speaking to our economics editor after your headlines.
It's 2:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. The Home Secretary has told MPs police officers will be automatically suspended if they're charged with certain criminal offences. The comments come after the Sarah Everard inquiry found Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer. He killed the 33-year-old in South London in March 2021. Her family says she died because he was a police officer and she would never have got into a stranger's car. Inquiry Chairwoman Dame Angelini has warned without a radical overhaul of policing practices and culture, there's nothing to stop another Couzens operating in plain sight. The Prime Minister has told police to use their powers to protect MPs after warning the UK is descending into mob rule. The government has already announced a £31 million package to boost security following safety fears. Concern has been growing over MPs being targeted by protesters since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. Latest figures show illegal migration has fallen, but legal migration is up. The government data also reveals small boat arrivals in 2023 were down 36% on the previous year. However, the UK granted asylum to over 62,000 people in 2023, the highest level on record. And the Defence Secretary has been visiting British and Ukrainian soldiers in North Yorkshire. Grant Shapps was asked about the United States' planned £47 billion military package for Ukraine in support of its ongoing fight with Russia. He has urged America to support Ukraine because it's in the interests of the United States of America. And Harry biker star Dave Myers has died aged 66, less than 2 years after revealing his cancer diagnosis. Cy King, his motorcycling cooking partner, revealed the news on social media, saying he passed away peacefully at home with his family. He said he can't put into words how he's feeling at the moment, but everyone who loved Dave is devastated. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally.
Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that, and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 37 minutes past 2, and Jeremy Hunt will deliver his spring budget next week, with the Chancellor expected to make announcements on the scrapping of non-dom tax status.
Well, they're considering it at least, and pledging to keep the triple lock in place for millions of pensioners. Shall we get the view of Liam Halligan, GB News economics and business editor, with On the Money? Liam, thank you very much indeed. So apparently the government, this is a bit of a U-turn, isn't it? Considering scrapping the non-dom tax status. That's a Labour policy.
Crikey, non-dom tax status. This is a real hardy perennial of British politics. I was speculating about non-dom tax status back in the 1990s when I was on Channel 4 News, when you guys were barely born. It comes round again and again and again. What is non-dom tax status? Let's have a little look here. I've got a special On the Money graphic. Non-dom tax status is when foreign people are non-domiciled in the UK, even though they live here, and they get a 7-year UK tax holiday on their overseas income. In 2022, around 55,000 non-doms were registered as living in the UK, but we've since seen some academic studies, particularly from Warwick and the LSE, suggesting the Treasury could raise around £3.5 billion a year if it abolished non-dom status altogether. How much is that? Well, if you want to lower income tax by a penny, it'll cost you about 6 or 7 billion, so £3.5 billion is quite big money. The problem is, though, that if you change the tax regime on non-doms, a lot of them will just up and leave. They're incredibly mobile people. They're often business owners, financiers. They've got rows and rows of accountants and advisors, a lot of offshore income. And the Tories in the past have tried to change non-dom status. Back in the 90s, then Chancellor Norman Lamont said that they wouldn't do it. Labour have come up with some policies suggesting that they will dilute non-dom status, charging non-doms more if they want to keep their status. And now the Tories are leaking to the papers that they're going to scrap it altogether. Liam, why are they saying that? Because an election is around the corner and they're trying to sort of head off Labour at the pass.
This was abandoned by the Conservatives, as you say, in the 1990s. And in the 1990s, money and people were a lot less mobile than they are today. If anything, the risk of capital escaping to new and growing markets elsewhere is higher. The uber-rich don't have to choose London to be their home. They could choose Dubai or New Delhi or anywhere in the United States. I mean, this is potentially a massive own goal here? I mean, there's one report that says 3.6 billion, but surely there must be other economists who say potentially this is a hit to the Treasury, not a gain to it.
Well, believe it or not, Tom, it's not very popular for economists to write reports saying, don't hit the rich with more taxation. But it is very popular for economists to write reports saying, why don't we fleece the rich, even though the top 1% of people in this country in terms of income pay well over a third of all income tax. Anyway, look, it's a really difficult conundrum. This reminds me, this policy, or if we make this tax change, we're going to get £3.5 billion. It reminds me of Labour saying if we remove charitable status from independent schools, adding VAT to school bills, we're going to raise £3.5 billion, not understanding at all that a lot of parents will just take their kids out of independent school because they won't be able to afford the fees if they're 20% higher, if VAT is added, putting huge pressure on the state sector. There's one other thing I want to talk about, because we really are, you're obviously covering Rochdale tonight, a very interesting by-election, and as you two know as well as anyone at GB News, a general election is in the offing, probably this autumn. That's why the parties are starting to hint at manifesto policies now, even before manifestos are published. And Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, is hinting that he wants to keep the triple lock. If the Tories win the election, he will keep the triple lock. What is the triple lock? Cue another on-the-money graphic. Here it is. The state pension goes up each year by the highest of either wage growth, inflation growth or 2%, 2.5%, whichever is higher. That is the triple lock. It's a Tory invention, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is now signalling the Tories will retain this triple lock, which will be very popular among the UK's 11 million or 12 million or so pensioners. The state pension will already increase by 8.5% in April, Tom and Emily, to £221.20 a week. It's about 11.5 grand a year. That was the increase in earnings growth during the year to last September. It was higher than the increase in inflation, and it was higher than 2.5%. So that goes up by 8.5%. That's hugely expensive. And a lot of your generation, frankly, Tom and Emily, will be thinking, why are the grey vote people getting all the money? They got all the houses, now they're getting all the money. Why am I paying such high taxes to keep pensioners with a higher state pension? But Labour also has signalled that they will keep the triple lock. Why are both the main parties doing this? Why are both main parties doing this? Because old people tend to vote and young people tend to not vote.
I don't know, not all of us young people feel that way. You know, there are a lot of pensioners who are struggling to get by. The pension triple lock, I mean, it sounds very generous indeed, but in reality, it's not a huge amount of money to live off.
Look, Emily, you're right, but
as long as I get it when I'm a pensioner.
No, here's the thing.
That's the question.
And Liam, I'd love your take on this. There is obviously real pensioner poverty in this country. There are people who really, really struggle, who do need their pensions uprated. But last time I checked, a third of pensioner households are millionaires. I don't think that millionaires should be getting...
Based on their assets, based on their house, based only on their home.
But there are some very poor pensioners. There are also some very rich pensioners. Liam, why is this a universal policy?
What you're getting at there, Tom, is that the state pension is what we call a universal benefit. Everybody gets it. That goes right back to the post-war Beveridge report, the setting up of the welfare state by the UK, a model followed around large parts of the Western world back in that post-war era. We have universal benefits right across the board because so-called means testing, assessing who should get benefits, is often very, very difficult if you're means testing in terms of income, because there's a big fat group of people in the middle who are on roughly average incomes, and wherever you draw the line, there'll be people one side of the line or the other side of the line who will feel either elated or aggrieved. That's why we go for universal benefits. And I agree with you, Emily. There are many people who would say there is pensioner poverty, and of course there is, though there's a lot less than there used to be. And there are many people who would say 11.5 grand a year isn't actually that high as a basic state pension by Western standards. And it isn't. On the other hand, Emily and Tom, if you compare your generation even to my generation, or certainly my parents' generation, we have had it much harder. I mean, my generation, for instance, were buying houses when the average house price in the UK back in the 90s was 4 or 5 times average earnings. It's now 10 times average earnings. And of course, the cost of living crisis means that many people who are in work feel they're paying a lot more tax than they are. The tax burden's at a 70 or about to be at a 70-year high. And yet it's striking, even though there is this big intergenerational imbalance, if you like. Old people disproportionately own homes without mortgages. Young people disproportionately are still renting and paying a lot more for their homes, again, than my generation and my parents did on rent and indeed on interest payments. So there is this intergenerational imbalance. And yet still, while they need to woo younger voters, both the Tory party and the Labour Party, almost straight out of the blocks, even before the election season proper has started, notwithstanding these by-elections, they're saying triple lock will be there.
Yeah, they are indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed, Liam Halligan, GB News economics and business editor. Of course, older people are more likely to own their own home.
Yes.
We just need to increase supply and then young people can have a look into.
This is true, but also, I suppose, it shows that older people are still a very, very key electoral asset to any party.
Well, absolutely. They bothered to turn out to vote, although I think lots of young people will vote in this election.
Well, anyway, coming up, it's a leap year day today. Very exciting.
I can propose.
You can propose. You're already engaged.
Not have more than one.
Are you a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints? No. Anyway, we'll be hearing from a man petitioning to move the leap day to a warmer month. What do you think about that? Up next.
Curious.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has made her much-anticipated appearance before the Scottish COVID inquiry today. It comes after allegations emerged that she deleted key pandemic WhatsApp messages, used the pandemic to push her own political agenda. But let's just cast our mind back, shall we, to August 2021, when Sturgeon was asked if she'd hand over all her WhatsApps to the inquiry. Here we go.
I think if you understand statutory public inquiries, you would know that even if I wasn't prepared to give that assurance, which for the avoidance of doubt I am, then I wouldn't have the ability. This will be a judge-led statutory public inquiry.
Which, for the avoidance of doubt, I am. OK. Well, you weren't, were you? But fast forward to today, and she was much less forthcoming.
WhatsApp messages between yourself and Mr Yusuf and Ms Lloyd were produced by you. Where did you get them?
They were provided to me through the Scottish Government.
But did you delete them?
Yes.
Did you consider yourself, against that background and your considerable ministerial experience, to be precisely the right First Minister for the job?
No, that's not how I would have thought of it at all. There's a large part of me wishes that I hadn't been.
All right, then. I'm joined now by Tory MP Lee Anderson. Lee, are those just crocodile tears?
Well, it looks like crocodile tears to me, Patrick. I mean, first we had the missing camper van. Nobody knows where that is. Now we've got this nonsense. We've got these burner phones, dodgy £5 phones from wherever they bought them from, WhatsApp messages going missing. It all looks a little bit dodgy to me. I mean, she's bleating on there, she's crying on screen. This is not cutting no ice. You know, it's crocodile tears. It makes you wonder what the SNPs are all about, Patrick. It looks... I mean, the people that have burner phones, let's be clear, people that have these dodgy phones where you can't trace them and disappearing WhatsApp messages, these are normally criminals, these are drug dealers, and you know what, these SNPs are no better than criminals.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 10 minutes to 3, and in case you didn't know, it's February the 29th, a leap day. This only happens, of course, every 4 years. Now, if you're a lady, you might want to take the leap and utilise Irish folklore by proposing to your partner. Or, if you were born today, you might finally be celebrating your birthday. But for one Brit, the February leap day should be scrapped altogether. Why? Well, why have an extra day of rain and cold? Why not move it to a different time of year?
Right, OK, well, this man we're talking about is time zone activist and anti-winter campaigner Christopher Snowdon, who joins us now, a man driving the change to move the leap year day to June so we can all get an extra day of summer. Christopher, please explain your logic here.
Well, it's very simple, Emily. You've already explained it, really. Or let's have a sunny leap day rather than a wintry leap day. I'm looking at my window now. It's just stopped raining. It's grey. It's cold. It's about 10 degrees. If it were the 31st of June, it would be roughly at least 20 degrees. So it'd be twice as hot. The weather would be twice as good. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, it's ridiculous that they're having an extra day of rain when we could have an extra day of sun. But, Chris, surely the fatal flaw in this proposal is that while we're an island country, we're not an island when it comes to the date and time system. Surely you would have to have the whole world to agree to move this leap day, not just Westminster.
Well, ideally, Tom, yes. I mean, you would want it ideally to be global. There is a bit of resistance from people in the Southern Hemisphere about this. They don't want to lose their extra day of summer, which is fair enough. If need be, I think that the British government should go it alone. That would just mean that we would be a day ahead of the rest of the world 4 months every 4 years, which I think would be quite good for morale. We'd be leading the world. And then I should mention the other part of the plan is to make the June leap day a bank holiday, because we don't get paid, by the way. If you're on an annual salary, you're not getting paid for today. You're effectively a slave, and I'm against slavery. I don't think it's fair. And so we would have a bank holiday. And rather than have a bank holiday towards the end of winter, simply have it in the middle of June. You can call it the midsummer bank holiday, Snowdon Day, whatever you want to call it. I mean, some recognition would be nice, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is to do this. We can be ahead of the rest of the world for 4 months. And then, June the 31st, we can have a nice bank holiday in the sunshine while the rest of the world catches up.
Christopher, what do you say to the smarty pants, the naysayers, who say, well, actually, you're not getting any more days of sun, really, are you?
Well, I mean, the evidence is overwhelming that days in June, on average, are a lot hotter than days in February. So I don't think this is a serious argument.
No, of course, and it's a very serious proposal that you're making here, Christopher. And I suppose the idea of offsetting the United Kingdom's date and time system from the rest of the world could be advantageous as well. Currently, if you want to fly somewhere very, very far away, you'll lose a day. But if we're ahead 1 day already, then you won't lose any days at all.
Now, you're being a bit silly, Tom. I mean, this is a serious proposal. We've got 4 years to do something about this. Let's not make jokes about the time. This is something that will be good for... You're laughing, Tom, but people have seasonal affective disorder. People cheer up in the summertime. This is a miserable day. People aren't enjoying themselves. They're working for nothing. And I'm saying to the United Nations, whoever can do something about this, the Pope, perhaps, Pope Gregory XIII was responsible for this system in the first place. It's nice to see the current Pope getting on board with this campaign. We've already had the endorsement of Richard Madeley and others. So, no, this is no laughing matter. This is about
Christopher, we're running out of time. Tell me how many people have signed your petition.
Literally hundreds, Emily. It's only been online for a few weeks. We've already had nearly 400 signatories. So the momentum is all with the campaign at the moment. We've got 4 years to sort this out. Let's crack on and do it.
Amazing. Christopher Snowdon, I'm flabbergasted you've managed to keep a straight face through this entire interview.
He's deadly serious, Tom. He's deadly serious.
It's not going to mean an extra day of... It's just a different time. The year will be the same. Anyway.
Well, that's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow on my own because Tom Harwood is doing the overnight gig.
By-election night. See you then.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. There's more unsettled weather to come as we go through the end of the week. Heavy rain, blustery showers and even snow for some of us. At the moment there is an area of low pressure to the north of the UK, bringing blustery, showery weather to many parts, but it's a waving front in the southeast that's brought persistent rain already today and will continue to do so for a little while before the rain clears away as we go through this evening. Some drier weather then through the start of the night, albeit with a scattering of showers across northern parts, before some persistent and heavy rain with some hill snow pushes into parts of the southwest and into Wales. Elsewhere, where we see clearer skies through the night, we are going to see temperatures dropping. Watch out for some frost, some icy patches, also some fog and freezing fog first thing tomorrow. The most unsettled weather, though, tomorrow will be across parts of the southwest and in Wales. Heavy rain and some hill snow could cause some travel disruption, some localised flooding. Otherwise, the rain is going to spread across much of England and Wales, could bring some winteriness over higher ground in particular. The best chance of staying dry will be across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but a chilly feel to all of us. Temperatures a little bit below average for the time of year. As we look towards the weekend, and we're going to still be under the influence of an area of low pressure that's going to bring more unsettled weather as we go through Saturday. Still the chance of more winteriness, but signs that Sunday is going to turn drier, albeit stay rather cloudy, before then we see the return to some more unsettled weather to start the working week. Temperatures rising a little bit too. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel. So join me, Tom Harwood, for the Rochdale by-election results. From midnight through to 6 a.m, we'll discover the twists and turns of the most unpredictable by-election in a long time.
You should be celebrating. I mean, slept hearing it, you know.
And from 6 a.m. Friday, join Michael Portillo on GB News Breakfast for his take on the results. GB News, Britain's election channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, you know, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods
And
are
remember,
being
a lot of
trashed.
people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid,
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, you know, the profits... I think on Clark's Farm I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something.
Right.
And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that have been passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. You know, I'm all for green protests, you know, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You know, you can't just go in and say you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead.
The Tata Steel thing.
Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. You know, lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting. You know, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you say
can't
you
get any more
support
obvious.
some of these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message. But I do appreciate the message. Yeah, but sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 3 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster all across the day. We've got a cracking show coming up and top of the agenda. There's reaction to the shock news that a record number of people were given asylum last year. Incredibly, the figure was up by a massive 242% when compared to 2022. Plus, we issued an eye-watering 1.4 million work visas, a 26% increase. Have we finally, totally lost control of our borders? Then there's the latest on plans to protect MPs, as Rishi Sunak warns we've lost control. And Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer. That's the verdict, the damning verdict of an inquiry into the murder of Sarah Everard. And Prince William has made his first public appearance since he mysteriously pulled out of an event on Tuesday. And that's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show as ever. It's always a huge pleasure to have your company. The figures from the Home Office today are absolutely astonishing. A national embarrassment, you could say. A huge escalation in asylum, a huge escalation in work visas, dependents, family visas, the care sector, the health sector. We've totally lost control. This is not a government in control. This is not a country in control of its own destiny. And the Labour Party today has put figures out about the cost of all this. They reckon that the actual cost of a hotel bills every single day, 15 million quid. 15 million quid every single day, £4.3 billion per year. We voted time and time and time again to take back control of our borders. Are they simply not listening to a single thing we say? I want you to tell me what you think today, all the usual ways, gbviews@gbnews.com. But let's crack on now. It's time for your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thanks, Martin. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. The Home Secretary has told MPs police officers will be automatically suspended if they're charged with certain criminal offences. The comment